Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your archbishop of banterbury, your chancellor of cheerfulness, your pharaoh of physical media, and of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I am robcasting on you, robcasting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you who make up this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. 2020. Am I right? I mean, we're once again here in California under a very strict lockdown. The state's locked down again because more people are dying than have ever died of COVID before. I know all the cynics out there are going, come on, how do you really know? Well, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. I know. It's getting weird out there, but never more so weirder than it is today in the entertainment business. My God. I went on two lovely podcasts this morning, and during the first one, excuse me, I'm coughing. News broke today. You've all heard it. Hang on. That I'm gonna just get right into this. I guess I shouldn't be shocked by this. Right off the bat, you've all heard that Warner Brothers obviously had decided to release Wonder Woman 84 day and date on both HBO Max and in movie theaters across the world. This had never happened before, certainly not with one of the large tentpole films. Mulan was a large tentpole movie. I guess it kind of happened that way, but it didn't really work very well. We all know that HBO has been struggling with HBO Max, their new service. They haven't been getting they haven't been putting up the numbers that Disney Plus did because they don't really have hey, look, HBO Max is a great streaming service. They have a lot of good stuff on it. Let me clarify that. I don't know if the actual app, I haven't used it yet or whatever, but they have a lot of good content that's worth getting. So we all know that streaming is only as good as the content they are streaming. That's how you win the streaming wars. Well, so Wonder Woman Day and Date, Christmas Day, they're putting it out. And what's significant about that, like with Mulan, you're talking about a film that cost between $150 million and $200 million. They were expecting $1 billion gross. But at the same time, they're building HBO Max. Now, I just want to point out to everybody that AT&T, which is, of course, a provider of, well, what do you think AT&T brings us? Phone service, cable service. Their business is not necessarily entertainment itself, but they're in the business of delivering entertainment and delivering data and phone calls and all those things to you. However, owning something like Warner Brothers, which is providing content that AT&T will deliver to you, is something that makes sense. I understand that. I get where they're coming from. And by the way, the AT&T executives, it's really sexy to have a movie studio and all that. I get where they're coming from. But what they did today, and make no mistake, unfortunately, this is not about movie theaters. It's certainly not about the exhibition of movies, because AT&T, they don't give a shit. They don't care. They don't care about movie theaters. What they care about is they care about their infrastructure and their delivery systems, and they care about HBO Max. That's what they care about. And today, for those of you who haven't heard, and if you haven't heard, let's go through it. I'm going to read this article. It was in Variety. Seldom. This is some very shocking entertainment news. Oh, that's not let's go to this one. Warner Brothers to debut entire 2021 film slate, including Dune and Matrix 4, both on HBO Max and in theaters. I mean, this is so unprecedented, I can't even begin to tell you how unprecedented it is. This article dropped at 10:30. It's by Rebecca Rubin and Matt Donnelly. When Warner Brothers announced that Wonder Woman 1984 would land on the streaming service HBO Max on Christmas, the same time it debuts in theaters, many expected it to be an isolated case in response to an unprecedented pandemic. Instead, the studio will deploy a similar release strategy for the next 12 months. In a surprising break from industry standards, Warner Brothers' entire 2021 slate, a list of films that includes The Matrix 4, Denis Villeneuve's Dune, Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical adaptation of In the Heights, The Sopranos prequel, The Many Saints of Newark, and The Suicide Squad will debut both on HBO Max and in theaters on their respective release dates. The shocking move to simultaneously release movies day and date underscores the crisis facing movie theaters and the rising importance of streaming services in the wake of a global health crisis that's decimated the film's exhibition community. Warner Bros. 2021 release slate also includes Denzel Washington's thriller The Little Things, biographical drama Judas and the Black Messiah, a remake of Tom and Jerry, Godzilla vs. Kong, video game adaptation Mortal Kombat, Those Who Wish Me Dead, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, Space Jam, A New Legacy, Reminiscence, James Wan's Malignant, and sports drama King Richard. In the short term, the move will inject some welcome buzz into HBO Max, a Netflix challenger that launched last spring without generating much sizzle. One of Warner Media's key rivals, the Walt Disney Company, has strengthened its share price because of its investment in streaming offerings such as Disney Plus, even as its core theme parks and film businesses have cratered. Warner Media and its corporate parent AT&T are likely making the move with an eye toward pleasing Wall Street. Oh, you think? Make no mistake. What have I said on the show a million times before? I say what Bob Sugar said and Jerry Maguire. It ain't show friends, it is show business. And this is all about business. It's all about AT&T's business. They don't give a rat's ass about the movie theaters. I hate to say it, but they don't. Doesn't affect them really. In the short term, anyway, let's get into it. Like Wonder Woman 1984, the films that Warner Brothers plans to release in 2021 will be available to HBO Max subscribers for 31 days. After the 1-month mark, these movies will only play in theaters until they reach the traditional home entertainment frame. From there, people can rent through online platforms like Amazon, iTunes, or Fandango. It's unclear when the titles will return to HBO Max. Look, nowadays, most movies make their most money in the first 4 weeks of release. I don't know how this move, why even bother? Why even bother to go theatrical? What theater chain is going to put a giant tentpole film in their theater that's been available on television for a month? You know how many will do that? 0? I mean, one of the things Universal was doing was pioneering a revenue sharing stream. I don't know if this is what's going to happen, but revenue sharing with the studios. This is a major studio. We lost Fox to Disney. Now we have Paramount, I guess Lionsgate. I mean, this is a cornerstone. This is like 20 or 30% of all the movies that theaters play throughout the year. Lost to them. I mean, sure, Warner Brothers is saying, well, we're going to do this for a year. I can't stress enough how deadly this is to the exhibition business. Warner Media Chair and CEO Ann Sarnoff referred to the model as a unique one-year plan. Executives at the company have stressed the initiative isn't expected to continue into 2022 or beyond. It's considered a temporary solution in response to the ongoing global health crisis. We're living in an unprecedented time which calls for creative solutions, including this new initiative for the Warner Brothers Picture Group, Sarnoff said in a statement. No one wants films back on the big screen more than we do. We know new content is the lifeblood of theatrical exhibition, but we have to balance this with the reality that most theaters in the U.S. will likely operate at reduced capacity throughout 2021. With this unique one-year plan, we can support our partners in exhibition with a steady pipeline of world-class films, while also giving moviegoers who may not have access to theaters or aren't quite ready to go back to movies the chance to see our amazing 2021 films, she continued. We see it as a win-win for film lovers and exhibitors, and we're extremely grateful to our filmmaking partners for working with us on this innovative response to these circumstances. Variety reported earlier this week that Warner's was considering sending several films to HBO Max and theaters day and date, but the studio opted to move forward with the rest of its upcoming slate because the film landscape is getting rockier as the pandemic worsens and parts of the United States consider implementing new stay-at-home orders. Look at that. The idea that people will return to the movies anytime soon is looking more distant as the pandemic nears the one-year mark. It's also clear what kind of distribution footprint, or unclear what kind of distribution footprint, I can't even read today, I'm so tongue-tied here, will await studios on the other end of the pandemic. More than 60% of U.S. theaters have closed down again, and that number could continue to rise if cases continue to spike around the holidays. Those that remain open are teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. As a sign of these troubles, just hours before Warner Brothers disclosed its plans, AMC announced that it was selling up to 200 million shares of stock in an effort to raise as much as $834 million and shore up its liquidity. To get theaters on board and allow Warner Brothers to break the theatrical contract for Wonder Woman 84, the studio is giving cinemas a more generous cut of ticket sales. Theater chains are receiving as much as 60% of revenues, but sources say that won't be the case for upcoming releases. Thursday's announcement from Warner Brothers is yet another example of just how dramatically the coronavirus crisis has shifted the power dynamic between studios and theater operators. Even with effective vaccines starting to be approved, the latest move by Warner Brothers suggests the balance may never return in favor of exhibitors. Months ago, Universal Pictures took an axe to the theatrical window, industry parlance for the amount of time a new release plays exclusively in theaters, but in comparison, Universal's terms of agreement with movie theater chains AMC and Cinemark make them look like downright martyrs. Under those pacts, the studio can put new movies on premium video-on-demand platforms in as little as 17 days. Films that generate at least $50 million in opening weekend ticket sales, however, will have to play exclusively in theaters for 31 days or 5 full weekends. Traditionally, new releases remain on the big screen for 75 to 90 days before they move to digital platforms for a $19.99 rental fee. Universal has agreed to give the two circuits a cut of digital sales to get them to play ball. It's not clear if theaters will receive any benefits from Warner Brothers. They will not. Warner Brothers, perhaps more than any of its rivals, knows how unforgiving the theatrical market can be amid a pandemic. When the studio released Christopher Nolan's Tenet in September in an attempt to revive a nationwide return to moviegoing, the $200 million budgeted sci-fi epic mostly fell flat. Tenet generated substantial ticket sales overseas, but returns were lackluster in the U.S. As a result, the movie is expected to lose many millions. In an interview with Variety, studio chief Toby Emmerich said that the hybrid plan came about after exploring various options for Wonder Woman 84. The international box office has significantly rebounded and fielded some big hits in China and Japan. Alternatively, the domestic market hasn't seen any movie come close to blockbuster levels in terms of ticket sales. HBO Max is only in the U.S. We thought it could be a win-win and give the consumers the best choice, he said. Unfortunately, the U.S. has been one of the most hobbled markets in terms of theatrical. Outside the U.S., in places like China, South Korea, Japan, parts of Western Europe, our films will be available in theaters. We think those markets can perform better. After considering all available options and the projected state of moviegoing throughout 2021, we come to the conclusion that this was the best way for Warner Media's picture business to navigate the next 12 months, said Warner Media's CEO Jason Kilar. More importantly, we are planning to bring consumers 17 remarkable movies throughout the year, giving them the choice and the power to decide how they want to enjoy these films. Our content is extremely valuable unless it's sitting on a shelf and not being seen by anyone. We believe this approach serves our fans, supports exhibitors and filmmakers, and enhances the HBO Max experience, creating value for all. So here we go. Mortal Kombat The Little Things, Tom and Jerry, The Many Saints of Newark, Reminiscence, Godzilla vs. Kong, The Conjuring. Actually, this is really interesting. Godzilla vs. Kong is now May 21st. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It's June 4th. In the Heights is June 18th. The Suicide Squad is August 6th. Ooh, Space Jam is July 16th. Dune is October 1st. Elvis, I think that's Baz Luhrmann's movie, is November 5th. King Richard is the 19th. The Matrix will be December 22nd. Matrix 4. Judas and the Black Messiah is to be announced. Malignant's to be announced. And Those Who Wish Me Dead is to be announced. So there you go. Wow. What to say? Now, before, I did want to mention that for Californians, and I'll say this because I live here, Gavin Newsom today dropped the hammer at 1 a little over an hour ago, actually an hour and a half ago. COVID cases are soaring here in California. Citing soaring COVID-19 rates and the lack of hospital beds, we've run out of ICU beds. California Governor Gavin Newsom has widened the state's stay-at-home order. Newsom also revealed early details of the state's vaccine distribution plan, with first recipients planned to include acute care workers, employees in skilled nursing homes, paramedics, and employees at dialysis centers. The first 327,000 vaccine doses from Pfizer will be allocated among 6 regions and will be arriving in mid-December. The second tier of workers who will get the vaccine include those in intermediate care facilities, home health care and community workers, public health field staff, and those in primary care clinics. The next tier covers specialty clinics, laboratory workers, and those with jobs at dental and oral health clinics and pharmacy staff. The new stay-at-home order is based on a region's available hospital capacity, where the ICU capacity falls below 15%. Once a region falls under the intensive care unit threshold, it will have 48 hours to comply with the order and must follow the new rules for at least 3 weeks. The new stay-at-home order bans non-essential gatherings and requires people to stay home as much as possible. Newsom also issued an advisory that all non-essential travel would be temporarily restricted statewide. The bottom line is, if we don't act now, our hospital system will be overwhelmed. This is exactly what happened with the first lockdown. This is what they were saying, and it is overwhelmed. Newsom says at a news conference announcing a new stay-at-home order, if we don't act now, we'll continue to see our death rate climb and more lives lost. Newsom said 4 out of 5 regions in the state, Greater Sacramento, Northern California, Southern California, and the San Joaquin Valley, are on track to hit the ICU thresholds shortly. On Thursday, California reported 18,951 new cases. California set records Wednesday with more than 20,000 new lab-confirmed COVID-19 cases out of 138,000 diagnostic tests, and the number of patients in California hospitals with confirmed COVID surpassed 8,500. I do not have COVID, I hope. Anyway. To be honest, I'm shocked by this, and I'm deeply saddened because I do. This is between Universal, what they're doing, even though they're cutting theaters in, and Warner Brothers now saying, "Oh, we're going to let our movies go a month after they've been on HBO Max." I will ask you, if you have HBO Max, would you wait a month to go see a movie in a theater, or would you watch that movie on HBO Max? This whole thing is about bolstering subscribers to HBO Max. The HBO Max rollout did not go nearly as planned as they hoped it would. And it's understandable. I get it. These streaming services are the future. They're looking over at Disney's numbers. HBO Max wanted to put up, it's 75 million in the first year. That's what Disney Plus got, and that's very impressive. So they want to see that happen for their shareholders. That is the future. AT&T, remember, they bought Warner Brothers. They wanted to have material to send over their own delivery systems, and that is the future. But look, I understand, like I said, it's show friends. It's not show business. Oh, no, it is show business. And there are no friends. And apparently, the entire distribution network, the theatrical distribution network for movie theaters, all of that. I mean, I see the studio. I get what they're doing. The AT&T corporate overlords, they don't care. They really don't care. Why should they care? Their business is not in distribution. Their business is to deliver data across their infrastructure, and they want to be able to deliver that data as data that they own. I understand that. HBO Max, they don't care about movie theaters. Now, I don't know if Warner Brothers called exhibitors, but, on the same day that AMC is trying to survive by issuing all those new, who's going to buy that new stock to give them the money they need to survive when they read something like this? I mean, I would love to have seen more coordination, or if Warner Brothers, like at least Universal, tried to make deals with the studios. But I mean, this kind of thing, I'm sure it was blindsiding to everybody. I don't know these articles. Maybe Warner Brothers called people to tell them or lessen the blow or do something. But in my mind, this is a real betrayal of the exhibition industry. It's not unexpected. I'm sure that there are people in the exhibition industry that knew something like this was going to come down the pike because it was something that was probably inevitable, especially with COVID cases spiking. It's not like the United States has done as well as Asian countries to sort of do our part to get rid of this virus. We did this, make no mistake. We did this to ourselves. And all of these new orders are for one reason only. It's because we have not, unless it really is all some kind of weird conspiracy to restart the economy of the planet, the Great Reset, as many are saying. I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I think this is the United States. We are staunch individualists. We all believe in personal freedom. And I think the idea of having to do what other people tell us, wear masks. I've seen enough people say, I don't have to wear a mask, which scares me. This is why this has happened. We let movie theaters down. And I'm very saddened by this news, and I don't know. To be honest, people are going to ask me, Rob, do you think theaters are going to come back from this? I don't see how they can. Even with a vaccine, how long is that vaccine going to take? How long can they manufacture the vaccine? And by the way, once the vaccine goes out into the general public, they've done tests on it, but how is it going to fare with millions of people getting that vaccine? We'll see. I believe in vaccines. I believe in medical technology. It's kept people alive. Humanity is in a lot better shape than we were, say, 150 years ago because of vaccines. But now we're going to see this vaccine work en masse in the Gen Pop. We'll see how that goes. I don't know how it's going to go. I don't fear it. But this was a fast-track vaccine that's going to be released en masse, and a lot of people are going to be using it. We'll see how that works. The sample size that they're going to be able to study is going to get a lot bigger very quickly. Hopefully it all goes well, fingers crossed. But I don't see how movie theaters are going to survive this. And I just, as a moviegoer, I don't think, how does Warner Brothers expect people, like, I know, as much as I love the big screen experience, hey, with HBO Max going Dolby Vision and 4K and all that, what is my incentive to wait a month? If I want to see Dune, I want to see Dune. I'm not going to not go see it. Part of the business that we're doing here as a YouTube pundit, I'm not going to be like, hey, bro, it's been bad enough. I haven't seen Tenet. So, wow. I don't know, man. I'm just very upset and saddened by this news. You can chalk it up to 2020. But what a bummer, man. What a monumental bummer this is. I feel really bad for all the people at, say, AMC that I'm trying like hell to survive this and do what they can, keep that business alive, because I know that the people who work in motion picture exhibition, it was fun going to CinemaCon last year. I met some people in exhibition. My uncle used to be in exhibition. And boy, people who work at exhibition, they really care. And this has got to be what a blow. this has to be to some people, and wow, it really bums me out. Now, before I get started, I want to get to your letters here. I want to give a shout out to Martino Sumani. Martino Sumani, not when I was on, he sent me three $100 tips. And I have not been on. We haven't done Robservations in 2 days. So I want to say, Martino, that was very generous of you, and thank you so much. And I would like to answer your questions right away. So, Martino, you said, hello, Mr. Fifth Season Burnett. That's a reference to my hair turning into Season 5 Don Johnson from Miami Vice, which is funny. I wish to take on your challenge to say something negative about you. I'm late, but a time shift anomaly, or maybe work schedule, prevents me to see most of your programs live. Where was I? Ah, yes. You need to paint the side shelves to match the middle one. I think he's referring to these white shelves here, matching this back black one. Well, the way I set these up, I had them in an old place. I do have them staggered, black, white, and I like them that way. And I'll tell you something else, Martino. When I have more action figures up, you see the Seven Samurai figures over here. If these white shelves are white, the light illuminates them, so I don't have to light the shelves so you can see the action figures, which is why I do that. You think they don't look good on film. That's all the negatives I can come up with. But if that's your only negative, I got to thank you for that. Sorry, you do not insult, you discuss. You do not trash, you analyze. Conversation can never be toxic, even if one doesn't always 100% agree with you. I can always learn something new and let my opinion be developed, even modified or changed by the glimpse of life experience and different perspectives you share. Well, first of all, I cannot thank you enough for saying that. That is very nice, and thank you so very much for supporting the channel. It goes a long way. I mean, you just never know. I will tell you, in this household, there's no reason for me not to say, we have a potentiality, not directly, but indirectly. We might have been exposed to COVID here in the house. I've been locking down since March, but hey, by no fault of my own or by Elizabeth's, we're going to have to get tested. I'm sure it's fine. I feel fine. We'll see. But, you gotta be diligent about it all. So you just never know. And, so I know that until we actually find out definitively, Elizabeth cannot work on the weekends. I mean, she has her own business as well as going to school. So this is not something that's good for us. So, and we're in the same boat as a lot of people are. So if we can't work, we shall see what happens. Hopefully it'll be all okay, but we have to find out. Now, it looks like Darth Plato just joined the Post-Geek Singularity. Do you know what that means, Darth Plato? If this is the case, I'll have to check. I believe that means we now have 100 members. 100 members to PGS, which means I will now release, not right at this moment because I'm dealing with the film festival. I will release my drunk Moonraker commentary. That's right. Members only, the first members only perk. I don't know if you want to read it or watch it, but if you don't like Moonraker or not, maybe you won't. But yes, I'm going to release what is probably, it gets a little wacky. I don't know how fun it's going to be to watch. But 100 members means drunk Moonraker commentary. So there you go. I want to thank you and other people that became members. Let's see. John became member. Brian Borden, Call Me Ishmael. The Richard. Hey, the Richard. Wolverine626 sent in a super chat. Warner Brothers 2021 release schedule. Wow, it has begun. Now, if only the Batman will move back to 2021. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It's crazy. But I have a lot more chats that I'm going to read, but I want to get back to your letters because I've missed so many of your letters. So I'm going to go back in. My God, I've got so many letters to read. This next one comes from Troy Ray. Dear Rob, Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 7, Unification 3 is as frustrating to me as it is disappointing. In your video on the episode, you shared your point of view that Star Trek had decided to go anti-Semitic. Yours was fascinating insight, and not one I would have readily agreed with had I not heard you out. I replied to your video and added that, in my point of view, their inadvertent racism is also insulting to anyone who comes from a biracial or multi-ethnic family. This opinion was formed based on the way that the Vulcan quorum treated the woman who was of combined Vulcan and Romulan ancestry. Overnight, while I marinated in my distaste, I know it's a nasty geek habit of mine, I came to realize what it was that I had found so truly off-putting about this episode, and perhaps all of Season 3 of Discovery. This Star Trek has fully embraced and validated identity politics. It's become the driver of the show. This is antithetical to the mythos and spirit of Star Trek. When a character in Star Trek says, even science cannot be separated from cultural and political context, that is not a statement of fact. That is not aspirational. That is an agenda. And it's the agenda that caused the Germans to lose World War II and the Russians to lose the Cold War. And if this is the philosophy of the 32nd century, well now, you know why, after 1,000 years, the Federation's technologies and cultures seem to have regressed from what we knew. You already saw this happening in Picard. The regression of culture and technology was to the point where androids were slaves and drug addiction and poverty had taken root again, even amongst some of our main characters. Star Trek has fully embraced and validated identity politics. The crew of the Discovery has problems to solve, but everywhere they go, they are turned away. Not because of anything that they have done, but because of who they are. Do they go to Earth? Denied, because they're Starfleet. Do they go to Trill? Denied, because they are Starfleet, thus Federation, and also because they're human. They go to the planet formerly known as Vulcan, although Lieutenant Vulcan has no moon. Denied, because they're Starfleet and because they are human. On Trill, how does our hero overcome the identity politics that prevent her from achieving common ground? She beats up everyone who is in her way and takes what she wants. On Navarre, how does our hero overcome the identity politics that prevent her from achieving common ground? She acquiesces to it. She agrees with it. She's not Vulcan, she's not Romulan, so she has no business asking for help to solve a problem. Her opinion doesn't matter, much like the opinion of a Romulo-Vulcan Pirshara, whom the other members of the quorum invalidate because of who she is, rather than what she says or what she has to offer. Shira can't appeal to Vulcan logic or tradition or etiquette because she doesn't have any of those things, because she's a half-breed. I laugh to keep from crying. I can only think back to the relationship between Captain Picard and Lieutenant Worf, wherein Captain Picard tells Worf how much he admires him. Orphaned in wartime, Worf had a very troubled upbringing where there was always a clash of cultures between his Earth family and his Klingon heritage. And when Worf allowed the aspects of his Klingon culture and beliefs, and perhaps even his nature, to rule him to the point that it violated the values and tenets of the Federation, Captain Picard and the rest of the crew were always there to remind him of his wrongdoing, pig-headedness, or short-sightedness. But Captain Picard also told Worf once that he took the best parts of being Klingon and the best parts of being human, all of those beliefs, all of those values, and integrated them into someone who would become the most courageous man Jean-Luc Picard has ever known. This Star Trek doesn't acknowledge those sorts of personal triumphs. The merit, if you will, of overcoming trauma and tragedy in order to learn, grow, and become more than you were before, to become a part of something bigger. On Star Trek Discovery, we cry and we punch people until we win. We leave logic and cooperation and aspiration behind. And Michael Burnham gets exactly what she wants by recounting every unprofessional and un-Star Trek thing she's done during the run of the whole show. She wins. She always wins, even when she loses. It's terribly frustrating and disappointing. Perhaps I'm taking things too personally because Spock is my favorite fictional character of all time when I was growing up. Perhaps I identified with him, being biracial and multi-ethnic myself. Perhaps I wanted to be super smart and super strong with sexy pointed ears. Perhaps he's just a great fucking character that I love unconditionally, and I take offense when I see ideals he fought for being picked apart on Star Trek. Lovingly destroyed on Star Trek. Thank you for letting me ramble and vent. It feels good to do it among folks who might understand and might disagree without resorting to insulting me. That's why I love the Post-Geek Singularity. Live long and prosper, friend. That coming from Troy Ray. I cannot agree with you more. I thought the depiction of what went on in last week's episode of Unification 3 was absolutely shameful. And I really appreciate this idea of yours. Let's be clear. When a character in Star Trek says even science cannot be separated from cultural and political context, bullshit. That is an incredibly dangerous idea that the writers of this modern Star Trek were espousing. They're wrong. They're wrong. And it is an insidious point of view to take. You know what? You want to bring in your controlled genetics? The experiments that the Nazis did, that the Japanese did during World War II? It's very dangerous. This week's episode of Star Trek Discovery, which I didn't have much to say about because I thought it was just a bad episode. But you know what it did again? It segregated our LGBTQ characters. Adira and our Culber and Stamets are now this group of friends. Completely segregated them. It has completely othered them amongst the entire crew. And what does Adira say 1,000 years in the future? Adira, who is a Trill, who has unique perspective on gender, who is now carrying a symbiote that has been both male and female for centuries. She tells Stamets, pardon me, not she, they were calling her a she on the show, but she finally came clean with Stamets and said, I identify as being non-binary, so please don't call me that anymore. We had our non-binary character tell our gay character that they're non-binary, and could you please use the proper pronouns? Well, I would think that when you're speaking to, when you're preaching to the choir, as Adira was at that point, what does that say exactly? Is that saying that only LGBTQ should hang out together because they're the only ones that understand one another? I think in their desire to, and what does it say about a Trill, somebody who's now a joined Trill, who's been both men and women, to then identify as non-binary? Interesting. I would have thought we would have been given some more insight into that, but no. They took a character 1,000 years hence and had that character talking in terminology of today. Well, that's not really aspirational either, because it shows we've gone nowhere and we have not evolved at all in our Star Trek future. I cannot tell you, Troy, how much I hate Star Trek Discovery for many of the reasons that you put in your letter. So keep writing these letters. I don't even think the people who are writing this show, or many of the people who are watching this show, are understanding what they're doing here. But the notion that you rightly pointed out about science, sure. Did our space program go to the moon for political reasons? Yes. But the knowledge that we gained in doing so, the scientists, the engineers, everybody that put us on the moon, didn't do so for political reasons. The mission was funded for political reasons. But knowledge is, and scientific knowledge especially, is not within culture or political boundaries. Knowledge, science, should be for its own sake. And if we allow politics and if we allow our culture to define the science that we are doing, we are lost. And I want to thank you for pointing that out. Another insidious and misunderstood message that this terrible, terrible science fiction show is giving people on a daily or weekly basis. It is so, I mean, I can't tell you how much I hate this show and how much it flies in the face of what Star Trek as a genre unto itself and as a franchise is, and that it is not seen by the very people that are making it is the biggest problem the Star Trek franchise faces. So thanks for your letter. And that was a good one. This one comes from Emil Johansson. Emil says, ever since like the 90s, people have said that video games and horror movies, etc., are causing violence and stuff. Oh, it was before the 90s. And I think I might be wrong, but I think around the 50s it was popular to send good messages to at least kids when doing kids stuff like superheroes or whatever, TV shows, comics, all those things. The heroes had to stand for something positive and they had to tell you what was right. Now we live in a time where even have movies about bad people where the protagonists are bad people and there are multiple protagonists with different opinions and nobody is more right than the other. We also live with fiction like fantasy that isn't even meant for kids, a la Game of Thrones. Not to mention there's plenty of violent entertainment out there not suited for kids. I think for the most part this is a positive change. I think this is actually a good thing because stories are not just about sending a political or anti-political message anymore, but it's about the art and craft itself of making good stories. You can't value a story the same way if the highest priority for the makers is to adhere to certain agendas at the end of the day. People fall in love and critique the stories themselves, not its indirect or direct messages to kids. Also, reality can be very unfair and complicated, maybe not for the people born into a family with good family values, but for many kids, life can be weird and rough. And to watch movies where there is just some preacher there confirming beliefs in what is right, it doesn't do anything for you. It has no value anymore because you can't connect and relate to someone self-righteous and smug. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Not everybody likes the same thing, and not everybody agrees on the same things. Not everybody enjoys seeing Captain Justice catching a criminal for the 999,000th time in a row. Sometimes it's more appealing to see good people fail and have their character smudged. In a sense, it's like the death of God. You kill God by suddenly putting dirt on the cape of Superman or forcing him into a complex moral dilemma that he can't get out of clean. You don't really kill God, but you stop believing in Santa, essentially. It's easier to represent the real world, or at least how we really feel inside it, if we are not held back by moral standards. So in a sense, escapism has it easier appealing to people for real or portraying reality that might otherwise have been unseen. Also, in the real world, people don't always agree on what the right thing is. Ask different politicians if they're good people and trying to fight for what is right. All of them are going to say yes, but neither of them will agree. So how can we agree on what is right when portraying good and evil on the big screen? Is Lord of the Rings, where evil is always dark and monstrous, more right than Game of Thrones, where humans are flawed? Or is it just less complex? Are we going to assume that a good person is always right when in the real world we are polarized? How will we do this? How can we let go of what we think and feel and all agree that, yeah, what that character did was heroic, etc.? If you have stories without a moral compass, I believe that forces people to think for themselves. I believe that it forces people to think for themselves instead of being brain-fed the same dead thing over and over. And in the end, I think that there's an even bigger moral to the story, because if you suddenly need to stop and think, that means you're making actual progress in my mind. If we don't need to think but expect some leader to think for us, then how can we say we're really good people? We barely know how to define good. We're just mindless slaves doing whatever other people are telling us to do. That's my thoughts. Well, that's interesting, Emil. I mean, I think there you have something there. For those of you who might be interested, The Critical Drinker put out a really good video about heroes and why we've needed heroes in our culture for thousands of years and what heroes mean to us and why they should continue. I thought it was a great video. I really appreciated it, so thanks for that, Critical Drinker. Omar 94 says, hi, Rob. There are 2 movie anniversaries which happened this year that I forgot to mention, as they were overshadowed by more popular films, so I wanted to give them a highlight now. In a previous letter, I mentioned Home Alone turning 30 on November 16th, 2020, as it came out on November 16th, 1990. However, another movie came out on that exact same date and celebrated its 30th anniversary on November 16th. That movie is Rocky V, the only movie I was ever thrown off the set of. I don't dislike the film, like many others, but I find it just all right, as I found there to be good moments and scenes like the flashback with Mickey, when Adrian breaks down and tells Rocky he is losing his family, and the final scene between Rocky and his son, where he gives his son the gift Mickey gave him in the flashback. I also like the song at the end of the film, Measure of a Man, which Elton John sang, and Disney's Alan Menken did the music and co-wrote the lyrics with Tim Rice. On November 22nd, I mentioned how that date was the 25th anniversary of Toy Story. However, another movie has an anniversary on November 22nd, but will celebrate its 20th anniversary. That film is M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable, which came out on November 22nd, 2000. I like The Sixth Sense, but I actually think Unbreakable is better. There are problems with it. I felt many scenes were slow, and they didn't clearly need to be, like many breaks between sentences and a camera slowly panning from one place to the next in the same scene. I also thought the ending was lackluster, since it doesn't really feel like an ending, but more like the end of the second act. You've been waiting for the third act to start, only for the film to end. Those are the 2 films I wanted to give a highlight for. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Well, you're absolutely welcome for that, Omar. Or I'm welcome. You're thankful. Either way. I love when you write in about these things and give us this kind of overview on cinema history. It's fun because you forget. You know, I'm always shocked at once a film becomes part of pop culture, how long it's been around for and how much it means to people. And I think it's amazing. This next letter comes from Jason Webster. Hi, Robert. I hope yourself and the hip members of the Post-Geek Singularity have cruised through a pleasant weekend. I would like to take this opportunity to provide an accompaniment to my views on J-horror by assessing the K-horror genre. Actually, you know what? I'm going to come back to this one because this is a long letter. I don't want to come back to that, but I'm going to come back to that, so don't worry. Don't you worry, because I like your letters on that stuff. Jermaine K. writes in and says, hey, Rob, thanks for reading my previous letters. It's been a while since I last wrote you. I was content to just watch and listen to other people's questions and viewpoints on various topics, and then I watched Robservations 565 and 66. The topic of toxic fandom has compelled me to write in again. Our current culture has many wonderful aspects, and some that are the total opposite of wonderful. The term toxic falls into that last category. Any fan who strongly questions the new pieces of an established franchise, especially if those questions have history and lore in them, is deemed toxic. Now, Rob, I don't mean the people who said nasty things about Rose Tico based on her ethnicity. I mean the fans who questioned how Rey could force heal but Luke Skywalker couldn't, or how light speed skipping is suddenly a thing, or why Star Trek Picard has decapitations and Icheb getting his eye torn out. Funny, I don't remember any decapitations in Deep Space Nine. Does having a respect and appreciation for the past of a franchise make a fan toxic? No, it does not. I believe something much more sinister is happening here. To quote a great Jedi, I have a bad feeling about this. The term toxic fan is being used as an easy bludgeon to quiet anyone who doesn't accept the current iteration of a beloved franchise. If they dare push back against the massive changes being made to the lore and the history, they're a gatekeeper. Another asinine term. It's good to see so many people fighting this form of censorship, and there's no better leader than you, Rob. Well, I thank you for that. By the way, the person who called you a gatekeeping twat should be ashamed. Thanks for reading and take care. Yes, I sort of took that picture down. Look, I took the piss out of that. I was, for those of you who don't know, I had a photograph of me where somebody made a meme of me and called me a gatekeeping twat because I don't like Star Trek Discovery. I think I don't like Discovery for a lot of valid reasons, as Troy so eloquently pointed out in his letter. Now, as I will say, this is not to say that you can't like Star Trek Discovery. I do not hold it against anybody that they like Star Trek Discovery. And remember, there are going to be people that Star Trek Discovery or Picard or Lower Decks or the upcoming Prodigy, it will be their first experience with the franchise. And for that, I am grateful. I am always grateful when people come in and they find the franchise to their liking. And one of the things that we all learned from Star Trek 09 is that it became a drug, an entry, a gateway drug to finding other Star Trek that people love. I believe this. I honestly believe that work does not need other people to defend it. It stands on its own. History will be a judge. And what I find very interesting is when people come back and they're always denying my love of the original series, trying to get me, oh, it's cheesy or whatever, making fun of it for whatever reason. Well, Star Trek, the original series, is the representation of what Star Trek actually is. Remember, the entire concept began with those 79 episodes on September 8th, 1966, at least here in America. You can't understand Star Trek, I think, from its very essence, unless you go back and watch the original series. And I would hope that people would not look back. Star Trek was an expensive show to make. Because, yes, when they beam down to planets, it's clearly on a soundstage. Some of the visual effects are not up to par. But at the time, compared to now, but at the time, it was one of the most sophisticated. The shots in space are still terrific. The Enterprise cruising through the void. This was done on blue screen. This was incredible technology that was being employed at the time. Now, that is not to say the great thing about Star Trek as a franchise for me is that it has evolved. It has evolved. But what Star Trek was always trying to do, I think, was become a classical storytelling delivery system where they didn't use a whole lot of colloquial terms. Did people swear occasionally? Sure. Did it always feel out of place? It did. Because there's a reason why there's a lack of pop culture references or real world references. They always made vague references, but they didn't say when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened on whatever the date, the Cuban Missile Crisis, was it October 14th, 1963? Maybe? Is that when it started? But it was like mid-October 1963, or pardon me, 62. It was mid-October 62 that the Cuban Missile Crisis happened because Dr. No opened on October 10th, 1962 in the UK, and a week later the Cuban Missile Crisis started. Talk about a topical movie. But anyway, the iterations of Star Trek, it's always grown and evolved. I feel that what we're getting now is antithetical to what Star Trek has always been as an aspirational storytelling delivery system. And I think Troy's letter was terrific in that way. So, yes, it's very, we lived through a very interesting time. A very interesting time. So we shall see. Kevin Mordhorst, I think. I hope I got that right. And I hope I got that right because this is your first letter, Kevin. Kevin Mordhorst writes in and says, Dear Mr. Burnett, you can just say Rob. Mr. Burnett was my father, you know. This is my first letter, and I'm excited to finally write you. There are two things I would like to thank you for before getting to the crux of my letter. Thank you for bringing to my attention the Second Sight 4K Dawn of the Dead set. If I had not listened to your show on how much you love the film, I never would have known it was getting a 4K restoration. Thankfully, I was able to convince my wife to purchase it for my 35th birthday. And surprisingly, she enjoyed the movie. She rarely enjoys horror movies. And I would also like to thank you and Az for doing your show 6 of 1 on The Prisoner. I had not seen the show in years and felt this would be a good time to revisit it. Every Wednesday, I would order a pizza and watch that week's episode. Then tune into your show and listen to you guys expertly analyze the episode while I paint my Warhammer models in my man closet. You'll fit right in. You know, I never got into 4K, 40K models because they're awesome, and I would have gone too off the deep end. I can't wait to listen to you guys try and make sense out of Fallout this week. I hope you like the episode. I wanted to write you a letter on the 1979 film The Hard Way, written and directed by Michael Dryhurst. John Borman was the executive producer, and even Brian Eno composed the theme, A Measured Room, which you can listen to on his Music for Films album. It stars Patrick McGoohan and Lee Van Cleef. McGoohan plays a recently retired hitman, with Van Cleef playing his handler, who must convince McGoohan to come out for one more job. I've never seen this. It's a beautifully shot movie that takes place entirely in Ireland and really shows off the beautiful countryside of the Emerald Isle. I remember from an earlier Robservation you stated you love movies filmed in Ireland and immediately thought of this movie. From what I've found, it's only shown on television and never had a theatrical release. That is a disappointment because the shots of the Irish scenery are quite stunning and would have been amazing to see on the big screen. If you've seen this movie, I would love to hear what you have to say about it. I haven't. If you've not, I've provided a link to where you can view it for free. Wow, okay. Well, I hope this was a satisfactory first letter. It was. I plan to write more in the future, and thank you for giving us the Post-Geek Singularity, a forum to express our views to the world. Sincerely, Kevin. Oh, okay. Kevin, and he writes in, pretend there is a space between Mort and Horst to pronounce my name correctly. So it's Kevin Morthorst. And he is from, oh, this is going to kill me. He is from Dunleary, Ireland. I am an American expat living here in Ireland, if you are interested to know. I do. Well, here, I'm going to put this Patrick McGoohan movie into the live chat so you can read it. Here it is, or read it, or watch it, hopefully. So there it is, and there's also an Amazon link if you want to buy the Region 2 DVD. It's too bad it's not on blue, but if it was made for TV, it might not even exist. And that movie was called The Hard Way, and it stars Patrick McGoohan, and he plays a hitman who's brought back for one last job. Well, Kevin Morthorst, thank you so much for writing in. I hope I did an okay job reading your first letter. Thank you very much for that. I love learning new things. Let's see. This is from Julian Mushkin. Julian says, hearty greetings to you, Rob, and to everyone else in the Post-Geek Singularity. I think today I need to express some of my thoughts about, wait for it, Star Trek. Specifically, I want to address some of the technology particular to this franchise and its current state in the most recent iterations of the show. As a bona fide Libra, I'm always looking to maintain a certain amount of balance in my life, and this has often led me to play devil's advocate when I see some points of view not being adequately defended in a discussion. Uh-oh. Should I be scared now? As such, I don't normally like to jump on the bandwagon and beat a dead horse. But, oh no. You and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same. For a minute there, I was getting scared. Julian, I was getting terrified. As such, I normally don't like to jump on the bandwagon and beat a dead horse, but this third season of Star Trek Discovery is ridiculous. You know what? I love it when people say that. You know why? Have any of you ever seen the movie My Beloved Shogun Assassin? Because I'm going to tell you one of my favorite things in any movie. And I'm paraphrasing. I'm not getting the quote of it right exactly. So at the end of Shogun Assassin, not the Lone Wolf and Cub movies, not the original 6, but Shogun Assassin, the amalgamation of the first 2. When he's fighting them, when Ogami Ito is fighting the Masters of Death, which the 3 storms in John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China were based on. So he's fighting the Masters of Death, and Ogami Ito has managed to cut one of the Masters of Death's throat open. And there's blood spewing from the throat. And it's going psss. And the Master of Death, as he's dying, he's talking about, he says something to the effect of, he's like, I have always wanted to cut someone's throat and to hear the blood spewing from their neck. There's a pause, he's like gurgling, and he says, but to have it happen to my own throat is, and he keels over, ridiculous. And he falls onto the sand, and whoosh, the torrent of blood, as it is wont to do in a Lone Wolf and Cub movie, opens up. So I love it when people end a sentence with, and say something is ridiculous. I never, ever, it always makes me think of the end of Shogun Assassin, so thank you for that. This third season of Star Trek Discovery is ridiculous, nor do I see any way to adequately defend it. As has been mentioned by you and others on this show before, sci-fi properties, whether they be literature, motion pictures, or television, often include elements of a story which ask that we accept something currently impossible as possible. With Star Trek, we are presented... by the way, I talk about this idea about when you're making science fiction, fantasy, and horror, whether it's for movies or television, usually in your premise, whatever the show is about, you get a one or two big asks. Like in the Harry Potter franchise, magic is real. That's an ask. And it's then up to that franchise to make you believe. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is when you're asking an audience to believe in magic, the best way to get them to believe is to define what that magic is, how magic works, how does your world deal with magic, and what are the rules? You have to set up the rules, because everything has rules. Our universe, speed of light is a rule. The speed of sound is a rule. So we are defined by those things. And the problem is, in storytelling, if your ask remains undefined, well, then it just becomes gobbledygook, because you can do anything. So an audience can't. The story becomes murky. It's not clear anymore, because you can't anticipate or understand the rules. So anyway, with Star Trek, we are presented with two big asks. First, that warp drive enables ships to travel at faster than light speeds to reach distant star systems, that our protagonists do not have to deal with the effects of Einsteinian relativity when they do so. The second ask is that the transporter device can safely disassemble our protagonists' bodies to subatomic particles or energy, pass that stream of energy through the circuitry of a starship, and beam it off the ship by means of sensor arrays and emitters to another ship or planetary surface. And that once that beam has reached its destination, our protagonists are securely reassembled into the same character they were before they stepped into the transporter. Each of these asks is a huge one in and of itself. Star Trek confidently presented both of these propositions to its audiences without looking back. And for the better part of 54 years, fans of the show will have accepted that the technology works. For the purposes of this letter, we will confine ourselves to a discussion of transporter technology. And let me stress the word technology, because that is how it has been used in the framework of the franchise through 5 live-action TV series, 1 animated series, and 9 live-action movies. Actually, 10 live-action movies. We will deal with its use since 2009 later in the letter. In the simplest terms, the transporter is a plot device that allows our protagonists to get to a location off the ship without the hassle of having to interrupt the story to include the cumbersome embarking and debarking of smaller spacecraft. In practical terms, TOS did not have the budget to build a shuttlecraft interior set or an extra model for effect shots in the first season. It has varied throughout the miniseries as a simple background tech to becoming an integral part of a story. Sometimes this has been used to its detriment, when it has been used as a form of deus ex machina when the plotline has driven our protagonists into a dead end. Even the Next Generation Technical Manual makes note of this in a section specific to transporter operations, stating in the notes the occasions where the transporter has been improperly used to save the day, but our writers have become more careful about such things. Now, I would like to point out with the transporter in the original series and what made it palatable in terms of, first of all, as our writer is pointing out here, absolutely, it was an elegant way to solve a production problem. How do you get characters on and off a planet? You beam them in. It's dramatically fun to watch, interesting, and it solves a big problem, travel time, and you can get to and from a location instantly. That is a way great science fiction storytelling uses an outlandish piece of technology but makes it believable. But here's what really kicked in. The transporter could not do everything. It was not magical. and sometimes you had line of sight beaming. Like you couldn't beam from the Enterprise if the Enterprise was orbiting North America, you couldn't beam over to the other side of the planet. You couldn't beam someplace until it came into range. So the transporter had limitations. Now people will say, but Rob, what about when something happened like in The Enemy Within in the first season of the original series where Kirk was split into two? Well, here's the thing. If the transporter as a storytelling device, if they make it believable, because of the way it works, the let's tech the tech. We don't quite know where it all goes or what it means, but the idea that somebody is split into two, that's a story you can tell because you've made the transporter believable. And the point of the story is not the transporter itself. The point of the story is that our main character has been split into two aspects of himself. The Jekyll and Hyde story, if you will. A classical tale that has been facilitated in a Star Trek context by the technology. And for the most part, remains believable. Also counterpointing with the fact that because this has happened, they can't beam Sulu up from the planet's surface. Could you have sent him a shuttlecraft? I would assume the weather conditions made that impossible. We all know they didn't have that at that point of the show, but anyway. The discussion of whether the use of the transporter actually kills you and creates an exact copy of you or directly reassembles the same material we started with has gone on for ages. This has been fodder for healthy and spirited debate among many fans. We will not delve into that aspect, and as I am in no way scientifically versed enough to get into the specifics of what actually is being done to one's body, we will leave that to other authors who have specifically addressed it. I will attempt to explain in layman terms what is needed for transporters to work according to the Next Generation Technical Manual. Starships operating in the United Federation of Planets Starfleet generate their main power through the controlled intermix of matter and antimatter. Auxiliary power is generated by the use of fusion generator plants. The energy generated by these systems is used by the EPS or electroplasma system, which shunts power all over the systems to the ship. The transporter systems do not require the immense power directly produced by the antimatter reaction and can operate on emergency power backup if needed. I don't like to generalize too often, but I suspect that most members of the Post-Geek Singularity have seen the operation of transporters in the Star Trek universe. We've seen it happen and have even heard the characters discuss what is going on when problems arise. Simply put, the subject of transport is placed in an annular confinement beam, which creates a spatial matrix within which materializes and dematerializes the process occurs. Molecular imaging scanners derive a real-time quantum resolution pattern image of the transport subject, while the primary energizing coils and the phase transition coils convert the subject into a subatomically debonded matter stream. This matter stream is briefly held in a pattern buffer, which helps compensate for any Doppler shift between the ship and the transporter destination. The Galaxy-class Enterprise was equipped with 17 emitter pad arrays that could transmit the matter stream up to 40,000 kilometers or 24,854 miles. For comparison, our moon is roughly 404,212 kilometers distant. The Enterprise in orbit around Earth would be unable to transport someone to the moon. The matter stream is directed to one of those emitter arrays and beamed towards the target destination of the transport while still held within the ACB. At the transport site, rematerialization occurs. Beam up from a site where no transporter pads existed would require the same process, but with the beam originating from the ship first. I boggle at the amount of computing power and memory that would be required to successfully rematerialize someone, let alone the energies required to hold all of the constituent matter and beam it up to 40,000 kilometers distant. I have often wondered how characters could be beamed up if they were on the far side of a planet relative to the position of the ship. They can't. We never hear of them deploying satellites to aid in beam directing, so we must make the assumption that a ship's transporter system works on direct line of sight from the ship, but the beams used to enable transport are also able to beam directly through a planetary body. I don't think they can. Never once have I heard a landing party's request to be beamed up met with the transporter operator replying back that they'll have to wait until the ship completes its orbit to be in position again. No, but I do think they say that the ship is out of range, meaning not just communications range, but transport range too, maybe. There are several conditions that are known to interfere with successful transporting beyond the limitations placed on its use by range. These are the use of deflector shields and travel while at warp. In special situations during the run of the shows, it was shown that if one possessed the correct operating frequency of an enemy's shields, then one could beam through them. An exception was made for the warp limitation as well as by making it possible if both ships are traveling at the same integral warp speed. By the time the Next Generation was in production, it was realized that transporter technology could be used in conjunction with the advent of the holodecks for creation of objects within the holodeck and for food with replicator technology as well. It was soon realized that this interaction of technologies might eventually lead to a writer postulating the replication of living beings or bringing back people from the dead, which would be detrimental to dramatic storytelling. It was determined that living beings were to be treated as requiring a quantum resolution for transport, whereas objects such as food and hardware would employ a lower-level molecular resolution, which could then be stored in memory for replicating at a later time. Only twice to my knowledge were these limitations bypassed for the story. The first occurred when a duplicate of William Riker was created during transporter issues arising due to planetary atmospheric anomalies. The other occurred when Montgomery Scott placed himself and another crew member into a repeating transporter subroutine to continually refresh the pattern buffers until they were eventually rescued decades later. A cautionary side note must be attached to that last exception, as only Scotty was able to survive the process when a power failure resulted in the other crew member's pattern degrading beyond retrieval. Mention should also be made of the temporary creation of two Captain Kirks due to a malfunction in the transporter accident that resulted in the hybrid being Tuvix. For almost 50 years, the various series and movies worked within the established rules set up in the Trek universe with regard to transporter use. That's correct. Then we are subjected to Star Trek 09 and everything that would follow it. The amount of disregard paid to well-established Trek canon in that movie cannot be overstated. For the purposes of this discussion, as well as an attempt to avoid my ranting about everything I detest about J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies, man, you and I, we park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. We will remain concentrated on the transporters, trying hard to ignore the fact that Spock, in a fit of emotion, ejects Kirk from the Enterprise to land on the nearby planet of Delta Vega, which should actually be nowhere nearby since it was established in TOS. It's near the edge of the galaxy. Prime Spock convinces Kirk and Scotty, conveniently assigned to said outpost, that they need to get back on the Enterprise by way of a hopped-up transporter reconfigured by Prime Spock with his future tech knowledge. Not only is said ship traveling at warp speed, and how would they even know the coordinates anyway? But it is clearly past the 40,000 kilometer limit of transport. But as in most JJ movies, things have to happen because of reasons. By the next movie, Star Trek Into Darkness, the transporter is seemingly so great that our antagonist is able to beam himself from a small one-person fighter all the way from Earth to the Klingon homeworld of Kronos. Such power now in our transporters, and by this revised timeline, we've not even reached the 24th century of Next Generation. By changing the rules of usage to suit their needs whenever they want, the producers of these Star Trek movies have turned a piece of believable technology into magic. I'm sorry, but I have to take this moment to just express a small rant about the disregard that producers of Into Darkness have for actual physics. Near the end of the movie, the Enterprise and the Vengeance engage in a battle near orbit of the moon. Both ships are heavily damaged and powerless. For some inexplicable reason, the gravity of the Earth exerts so much force on the two ships that they have only 30 minutes before they enter the Earth's atmosphere. From near lunar orbit, with no forces other than Newtonian physics to influence their motion, they are pulled towards Earth in the time span of 30 minutes? For fuck's sake, where do these idiots go to school? So now we are in the era of Star Trek Discovery and of Star Trek Picard. Of course, there is no surprise that Alex Kurtzman is not only producing these shows, but what's this? Yes, he was involved in the production of Star Trek 09 and Into Darkness as well. I do not recall anything too egregious regarding the use of transporters in the first 2 seasons of Discovery, but Picard piqued my interest with the use of some sort of Uber transporter hub. We see Picard exit from an empty gateway in a flash of light. There's a whole row of such gateways with people entering and exiting them at will. I find the notion of such transporter hubs a logical extension of commuting. I like the idea in principle, but I really want to know about that technology. How do the gateways cycle so quickly for each user? How do the gateways know the destination of each user? How many pattern buffers are linked to each gateway? In truth, I fear that the producers of Picard probably don't know that either, because for them, it's just a cool bit of Trek tech. So now we find ourselves in Season 3 of Discovery, with our stalwart crew thrown into the future of the 32nd century. Of course, there should be all sorts of updated technology, and sure enough, upon rejoining a denuded Starfleet, Discovery's crew are given new Delta badges for their uniforms. These badges are really special. We're informed that they're a combination of communicator, translator, tricorder, holopad interface, and this is the really good part, personal transporter. I am astounded. And of course, without even any training, our crew is using the holopad function and transporting hither and yon at will, except for poor Linus, a Saurian member of the Discovery's crew who can't seem to get the personal transporter to deliver him to his desired location. By the way, the worst kind of humor. We talk about an inclusive show. You give us a character, a Saurian, that goes all the way back to the original series. We even saw in the background in the motion picture. And you make that character an idiot. You completely compromise that character. I mean, this. Let me just interrupt this letter for a bit of a rant. Not only is our Saurian character shown as somebody that, apparently can't use his personal transporter, but now is shedding, and you can go peel skin off of him. So in their idea, in their desire to be inclusive on this ridiculously segregationist show, they take a character like him and Linus, and he becomes the butt of jokes on not one episode, but 2? I fucking hate this show. I hate it so much. Well, how the hell does this badge work? No one seems to voice any commands for it to operate, so we must surmise some sort of mental interface. Are we supposed to take at face value the statement that the badge itself is operating as a personal transporter and all that function entails? If so, given what we know is necessary for transporters to operate in the Trek universe, how would that work? What kind of power source is that little badge containing? Where does the annular confinement beam originate from? How does the beam of energy with our protagonist's subatomic particles now travel? If that badge can contain so much power safely in its little body, then why are they still concerned about needing dilithium? It seems to me the amount of power in one of those badges eliminates the need for safe matter-antimatter reactions. My biggest question about this Wonder Badge is this. If those badges actually contain the power to transport someone wherever they want to go, what do they need starships for? 5 will get you 10 that the writers for this show don't know the answers to those questions either. They probably haven't even asked them. They only thought to introduce some cool future tech, but what they created is just too big an ask for me to accept. Just some more thoughts I needed to share with you all, my fellow imagination connoisseurs. Cheers and live long and prosper. Julian. Well, Julian, this was a very long letter. Julian Mushkin, and I loved it. Look, from a storytelling standpoint, on The Next Generation On, you had people like Rick Sternbach and Mike Akuda who wrote the Star Trek Technical Manual to ask these questions. They were always trying to figure out, how does the tech work? And while it probably is not something most viewers figure out, one of the reasons that Star Trek, the original series, took hold in the minds of people was because they believed in it, because there was thought put into this fantastical world. And it did things, it didn't always work, it wasn't always there, but they tried. And that's suspension of disbelief that's when things are incredibly, I mean, these are foundational elements to science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Creating those rules, making you believe. I've said before, like in the Hellraiser movies, you have the lament configuration. Like, they even played fast and loose with this later, but the Cenobites can't show up unless you ask them to. You know, they don't just show up to tear your soul apart. They show up because you, in your hubris or what your desire or your whatever, you choose to open the lament configuration. And I think what Julian was saying, a lot of modern Star Trek, and certainly most of Discovery, because the lack of any kind of actual science, in the last season when the red beacons all show up at the same time, they're all detected at the same time. I'm like, I can't believe that, because anyone who knows on a galactic scale, nothing would just show up at the same time. It's impossible on that. It has to be an element of magic. And they do that in modern Discovery or in modern Star Trek all the time. All the time. And it becomes very, very difficult to take it seriously. Anthony Choice is here. Anthony Choice is responding to Levi Old Elk's letter. Weird irony. I was just having a discussion seconds ago with my co-conspirator at Indigenous Action about the very issue of how rare indigenous film and TV is on video in terms of our access, especially across generations in terms of pop awareness in our native communities. Our thought only moments ago was about setting up an archive of these films and shows so they can be accessed. That's actually a really good idea. By the way, I have never heard of the Indigenous Action, and so I'm going to put that in this live chat. Let's see what Indigenous Action is all about. There you go. You can find out. For the record, we have 2 existing large libraries for access in our community. One at, again, please forgive my pronunciation, one at the Tala Hugan Info Shop in Flagstaff, Arizona. Ooh, that sounds pretty interesting. I'm going to put that in the live chat as well. Wow, see, I learned something new. This is why I love this show, because I learn things that I didn't know before. I'm going to send you over there. This is interesting. An anti-colonial direct action resource center. Ooh, I like that. I'm putting that in the live chat. Here you go. What a cool thing. So there that goes. And the other with me, the body of which is likely to be donated to a similar library and Indigenous Action Center we're trying to put together in Denver, and neither is overtly video libraries. At present, the overwhelming task at the info shop that we are engaged in is an Indigenous mutual aid, specifically in response not just to COVID-19, but to the single worst location in the country in which it is run roughshod, and that is the Navajo and Hopi, which is in the middle of the Navajo Indian reservations and within our own suburban indigenous communities, all while winter is coming, a very real risk for our relatives. One of the things we've been engaged in over the years of our existence has been movie showings, with an emphasis on indigenous issues, content, creatives, and etc. We've even engaged in the production of a feature-length documentary, The Snowball Effect, and a feature film, Power Lines, and the temporarily paused Out of Your Backpack Media Collective produced so many indie short films and vids we've lost count. Cool. Here's another link. And I'll put that down here. Here you go. In the gathering of our archives, we've accumulated a lot of films and video. Please feel free to put Levi in contact with me. I may be able to help him find material right up his alley, and more specifically the film he's looking for, number 2. But I suspect there is a longer list than just one film that interests him. Well, I hope that Levi Old Elk is watching this, Levi and his wife. And please contact Anthony Choice. I put those links there in the live chat if you're watching now. And get in touch with him. How cool is that? This comes from our friend Emma Bannon. Although I will say Emma Bannon is a friend up to a point because her jokes sometimes make me embarrassed to know her. I love her anyway, though. Hi, Rob and my fellow imagination connoisseurs. I wanted to write to you about one of my favorite films, Mystery Men. One of John Campion's, too. Many people won't know of it, I guess, but it's one that I've always liked since I discovered it back in this halcyon days where places like Blockbuster existed. Mystery Men was released in 1999, directed by Kinka Usher, a French director who came from the world of commercials and promptly returned there after filming Mystery Men. It starred Ben Stiller, Jeffrey Rush, Janine Garofalo, and William H. Macy. Based on a Dark Horse comic, it had a budget of $68 million. Originally, Danny DeVito was set to star and direct, but left the project due to differences over who would produce the soundtrack. Ben Stiller was then approached, but initially turned it down, only to sign on after being persuaded by Garofalo, who had met with Usher. No, Rob, not the singer, the director, and liked him. Filming began in October of 1998 and was completed some 6 months later in April of 99. Released in July of that year, it managed a disappointing $10 million on opening weekend and only went on to gross a mere $33 million worldwide. It was not what you'd call a success, although it has since achieved something of cult status. But I love this movie. It was anarchic, fun, the heroes were sympathetic losers rather than being all-powerful men of steel, and the design of Champion City, where the story is set, reminded me very much of a Tim Burton aesthetic. The film tells the story of three friends, Mr. Furious, the Shoveler, and the Blue Raja, who try and fail to defend an old people's home, only to be shown up by Captain Amazing, played by Greg Kinnear. He is a media-savvy superhero whose costume is covered in sponsorship logos, who is more concerned with exposure and publicity than helping those in need. It struck me whilst rewatching that he has elements of Homelander from The Boys, but that's just me. Whilst the three friends shuffle off defeated and forgotten, Captain Amazing realizes that all of his foes are either dead or in prison, so no more publicity or sponsorship. He hatches the idea of releasing his greatest foe, Casanova Frankenstein, from prison, turning up to his parole hearing at the prison, which must have drawn inspiration from both Arkham Asylum and Marvel supervillain Prison The Raft, as his Bruce Wayne-like alter ego Lance Hunt to declare that Frankenstein be given another chance. Frankenstein is released and immediately starts plotting to destroy Champion City, and Captain Amazing is easily caught when he attempts to capture Frankenstein in a career-boosting move. The Shoveler, Blue Raja, and of course Mr. Furious decide to attempt a rescue mission which goes horribly wrong, and they decide to recruit new members with a barbecue where such prospective heroes as the Waffler and Pencilhead, who erases crime, turn up before confronting the villain and eventually heading for a showdown with Casanova Frankenstein. I rewatched this recently, and while it perhaps doesn't quite hold up to the repeated viewing, there's still much to enjoy about this crazy superhero flick. The characters are a fresh take on the usual superhero tropes, and whilst they're losers, at least to begin with, they're nonetheless lovable ones. The Blue Raja lives with his mom, Mr. Furious has a crush on a waitress played by Claire Forlani, and the Shoveler has a wife who loves him but is tired of his attempts at being a hero. There's some great moments in the movie. Mr. Furious and his rather awkward attempts at chatting up the waitress, and the Blue Raja scene, or the Blue Rama scene with his mom where she hands him the family cutlery to help with the climactic showdown with Frankenstein. Eddie Izzard is great in a smallish role as a disco-loving henchman who killed the bowler's father, and the description of his death, he came home late one night and fell down in an elevator shaft onto some bullets, had me laughing out loud. Even Tom Waits has a cameo as a weapons dealer who helps the heroes as they arm themselves, and Frankenstein's gathering of criminals is right out of an Adam West Batman episode. Oh, and something I'd entirely forgotten about, Michael Bay, yes, that Michael Bay, plays one of the villains. It's all very silly and yet absolutely draws inspiration from many other sources, but it does so in a fun and entertaining way and always makes me smile. I guess it shows something that I've always believed in, that a film doesn't have to be perfect for us to enjoy it. It just had to elicit a response in us or connect to us. And Mystery Men certainly makes me smile. Take care, Rob, and all of our fellow imagination connoisseurs. Enjoy whatever show or film you want to, unless it's Discovery. No, seriously, go watch some Star Trek or Deep Space Nine. Do it now. That, of course, is from Emma Bannon. Thank you, Emma. Always delightful to hear from you. This next one comes from our friend Torrin Atkinson. Dear Rob, it's me again. On a recent episode, you mentioned that you wouldn't want to be on the Discovery because you'd be worried that the crew would get you killed. This made me think of Monty Python and how much it scared me as a kid. Why? One of the defining aspects of Monty Python that set it apart from anything else was that there were no rules. As much as I love it and it was a huge influence on me, thinking about living in that world was like a nightmare. You could be in a pet shop or a cheese shop or a bookshop, having a dispute with the shopkeep, and then suddenly, for no reason, a 16-ton weight could drop on you, or the army could come and whisk you away, never to be seen again. You can't anticipate it, you cannot prepare for it, or seek refuge in a place of safety because there's no real safety and there are no rules. That's certainly of a world where anything can happen leaves me with no sense of security. I wonder if my anxiety about this springs from my relationship with my father, who also changed the rules of the house when it suited him. Too personal? But even on an unemotional level, a world with a lack of rules is an affront to my sensibilities. It's why I could never get into the Harry Potter movies. I mean, sure, I forced myself to watch them all, but how can you relate to and be invested in the fate of a character who can solve a problem literally by waving a magic wand? Maybe I missed something. But it seems to me that if the Potterverse ever had rules, they were never made clear. And that's one of the big reasons I drifted away from Star Trek Discovery. Not only does it ignore the rules of the original Trek series, and to be fair, that's something that every series has done here and there, but it also ignores its own rules. Like you, I have no faith in the crew of the Discovery, or indeed any other aspect of this universe. It's entirely too unstable for me to want to spend any time in. Live long and play my Ruin Nation trailer, Torrin Atkinson. Yes, Torrin, that trailer will be played this week, I promise. Torrin, you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. This next letter comes from Terry Flynn, our old moderator, Terry Flynn, the Sheriff of Nottingham. Let's see. Dear Rob, congratulations on the large input to the first annual Intergalactic Imagination Connoisseur Film Festival. I wondered how your judges will reach a decision purely on professional grounds, since choices and how to aggregate them constituted my career for over 20 years. To illustrate the potential problem, let's return to a controversy over Rotten Tomatoes when Captain Marvel was released. A huge number of 1 star out of 5 reviews were received. Let's leave aside the eventual finding that lots of these came from people who'd never seen the movie. What a rating system like a star scheme relies on are some mathematical properties, one being that a 4-star movie is twice as good as a 2-star movie. In 3 occasions, when you must choose between them, you would typically choose the 4-star movie twice and the 1 2-star movie once. It's all odds in a probabilistic sense, and anyone versed in betting will get it. Trouble is, people don't use stars like that. I had to do things like judge whether the suspiciously low number of 4-star ratings in some studies were due to older Mandarin-speaking immigrants who dislike using 4 because of the connotations with death. If you use a scale with more numbers among Cantonese speakers, it gets even worse. 2 numbers are slang for a part of male anatomy, one in its downward state, the other in its upward. It's a minefield. Star systems really are truly garbage. You can't add them or compare or anything. What do companies do if they really want to predict demand accurately? They choose an answer format that is closest to the kind of decision their customers will actually make. Discrete choices are choices between discrete options. If in repeated viewings I choose Captain Marvel 3 times as often as Elektra, but I'd previously given Elektra 3 stars and now give Captain Marvel 1 star, then the star ratings are very, very suspect. They are practically the reverse of what they should be. You may ask why the choices between the movies are better indicators of audience demand than the stars. Because 40 years of research across several disciplines have shown them to be in prediction. Because a guy won a Nobel Prize for predicting demand for the BART in San Francisco, California, almost perfectly before the thing was built, all because he knew how often people would go for a light system compared to their car as a function of where the stops were, frequency, etc. Fundamentally, movie studios want to know how many ticket sales will result, and that comes from comparisons with other movies. You can chain together comparisons to find out how good a movie today would fare against a movie it technically never competed against 5 years ago. Don't press the comparisons too far, but those of us who know how far to push it can instantly spot movies that have been victims or weirdly hyped by either the public or reviewers on Rotten Tomatoes. Returning to your own competition, if judges are willing to do a load of comparisons of movies, choosing best and worst in various subsets, I could give each judge an individual set of scores for each movie based only on their choices. Since these are probabilities, I'd watch this movie twice as often as that movie. They can be added, and you can get an undeniable winner, unencumbered by problems like this judge only uses 1 in 5 to maximize their influence, etc. You could also look at deviations by judges. Judge X went for time travel movies much more than on average, or some such. Just a thought, and be willing to give help if you want. Hope all goes well. Well, Terry, that's a great idea. I didn't really think about how I'm going to get the judges to judge, but I do love that. I think it's a great idea. We should do something like that. I'm down. Let's see. Wow, there's a lot of there's a lot of things. Let's go and see what you guys are saying, man. You guys have fired in a lot of questions, so let's go to that. Willow says, do you think the shift to streaming was going to happen regardless, and the pandemic has just served to hasten the transition, or have the studios now just lost all confidence in the viability of the theaters? Willow, I think both. I think, yes, the transition to streaming was happening. It was on its way. Mostly because the studios are they're controlling for once, and they don't have to worry about the legality of it. Disney is sending their product direct to the consumer. And I think that's what everybody wants. Ultimately, they want to cut out the middleman, and they want to be able, movies and TV, you can stream them. So Disney Plus sends them directly to the consumer. Then they have to figure out analytically how much they're going to spend. I mean, you'll be able to figure it out based on, like, eventually there's only so many people in the world, so they have to know where their subscribers are going to tap out at. And if you get, like, let's say you have 1 billion subscribers, each paying, well, just 1 billion subscribers, if that's what you're going to finally get to, paying $10 a month. That's $10 billion a month. So when you're there, you know that you're not gonna grow any more subscribers. So for the sake of argument, that $10 billion a month has to pay the salaries of everybody who works at Disney Plus, and also whatever programming you're going to make. And then also you want to show some profit. So ultimately, that's where they're going to eventually all get to. It's all going to cap out at a certain amount of money, and they're going to know that streaming service, because there's just no more people on Earth. If it goes to the point where they reach peak saturation, you're not going to be able to add any more subscribers. And let's just say 1 billion is the number where everybody tops out at. And ultimately, if you for sure were providing great content, you're making $10 billion a month, well, that's pretty good income. You know, that's where Disney's going to want to get to, I think, ultimately with their content. They're already at 75 million, so they're on their way. But I think ultimately, yes, they were going to, the theatrical experience was always going to be limited. And unfortunately, I think with streaming, eventually the theatrical, people said to me, well, Rob, people are always going to need places to go and do things. That's true. But I think that moviegoing will probably be supplanted. I think Willow, something that was going to take 10, maybe 20 years, maybe even longer. As Pris said in Blade Runner, that's accelerated decrepitude. I always love that. Accelerated decrepitude. Calvin Bose is here. Our friend Calvin is here. Calvin's son Braxton asked, In Trouble with Tribbles, Klingons are about honor, so how is poisoning grain and killing innocent people on Sherman's planet with that grain honorable? A very good question. It is not. However, I would hope that this would be discovered before anybody really died. I mean, it was diabolical, certainly, but maybe they figured some people would get sick and it would be discovered that the grain was bad and they'd be able to swoop in and solve the problem. But a very astute question from Braxton. Tell him hello for me. Brendan Sheehy sends in a tip and says, with all the talk of returning, I'm surprised few bring up the possibility of Liam Neeson returning in the Obi-Wan series. It's heavily implied in the prequels that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan would be able to communicate via the astral planes of the Force. I was betting on this with John Campea yesterday. I bet we see him. I bet we do. Calvin goes on to say, John Campea said that the title of a film has no bearing on its success. But do you think the Rocky Horror Picture Show would have been a phenomenon if it had just had the original title? that came from Denton. They came from Denton. In Denton. Probably not. I think you're probably right. I think, look, the Shawshank Redemption killed it. I think titles are important. I think they do. That was one of the reasons I fell in love with the original Twilight Zone and the original Star Trek. I mean, Who Mourns for Adonais? Requiem for Methuselah? The Doomsday Machine? Is There in Truth No Beauty? Those are titles, man. Next Generation, The Host, The Game, The Battle. Discovery has good titles, I'll say that's, but usually they're kind of a little pretentious. But, you know, I think definitely titles have a bearing on these things. Steve Joseph says, do you like Star Trek Beyond? Nope, I don't. I mean, it's closer to Star Trek, but I have to tell you, when you have Captain Kirk going, I don't know, man, it's boring out here. We ever going to make a difference? I don't know. Maybe I'll go to Yorktown. I hated that shit. You know, again, no, I didn't like it very much. And I love Justin Lin as a director. I mean, come on. They defeated it. Let's play the Beastie Boys and we'll defeat this alien technology. Let's, like a kite, let's throw this old starship off the Franklin. Let's get it. We'll throw it off this mountainside and we'll get it to carry aloft on the air. Let's do that. Glenn Taylor sends in, big fan of your show. Which 80s genre do you think is better? The comedies, the action movies? Personally, I say comedies. Your thoughts? Well, let me tell you. And again, I'm giving up what we're going to talk about on Let's Get Physical Media this week, but one of my favorite movies of the 80s, Beverly Hills Cop in 4K. In my mind, one of the great action comedies. So it's hard. I mean, separating those genres, I think the 80s, in terms of action, you had Canon Films making like American Ninja with Michael Dudikoff and Steve James. I mean, I think there was Delta Force. There was a lot of great action movies, and there was a lot of great comedies. I mean, I think they're both really identified with the 80s. So I think it's hard to pick one or the other. Unless you actually sat down and quantified how many comedies came out, as opposed to, I mean, some of my favorite comedies came out in the 80s and some of my favorite action films like Die Hard came out in the 80s. So it's tough. It is tough. I don't know if I've answered your question. I can't pick one or the other. Nick Parrish sends in 3 of them. So what's up, Rob? Like you, I'm hot about the AT&T shenanigans. Warner Brothers seriously thinks we're a bunch of suckers with those statements Ann Sarnoff and Jason Kilar put out today? I know. No one believes we're going to be worrying about COVID most of 2021. Dr. Gottlieb has said before that COVID should mostly be a 2020 event, and most doctor statements I've read say they think that life will return to normal by summer. It's clear, Rob, that at this point, Warner Brothers is using the virus as a scapegoat. The virus is a cop-out. They should just admit that they want to destroy theaters and screw people who like theaters. You were right, Rob. I should have listened. Studios are shady and don't want theaters around, so forget Warner and that weak HBO Max. There's no doubt by sometime next summer you could get back big audiences in theaters again, and a blockbuster could go back to making blockbuster money. So Warner's needs to stop trying to play us and hope that the theaters and filmmakers call their bluff. Nick, that's not so much the problem as can theaters survive? You're asking businesses to survive the better part of 2 years when you have real estate prices and all that. It's tough, man. It's hardcore. But yeah, it's monumentally disappointing to me what has happened. And I think it was an inevitability. They've just pounced on this, and it's too bad. We'll see. I just don't think most theaters are going to survive. And what are we left with? I mean, Warner Brothers isn't even saying that they're going to leave it on HBO Max first and make a month-long window. It's like the exact opposite of what they should do. They should give the movie theater is the 4-week window, and then put things on HBO Max. But they're not doing that. Bad. It's bad. Leroy Kelly says chances that Storm will be in Black Panther 2. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see Storm and T'Challa hook up like they did in the comics for a while. But I don't know. I mean, it would be a good way to introduce Mutant. You know, like somebody, I would love to see that. I think it'd be great. Cinema Gulp says, Rob, you blew me away yesterday on The Prisoner when you gave your possible ending and outcome for how Lost should have ended. Good to see you back. Oh, thanks. Thanks. I'm sorry I didn't do 2 days. I was just busy and tired. G Money Money became a member. Thanks, G Money Money. I guess I'm gonna have to drop that Moonraker commentary. Calvin Bose sends in another tip. My feet is my children's my feet is my children's kids who will never know what it's like to see a film in the theater. Yeah, I hope that isn't the case, but I don't know. The Blizzard of Taz says, how do you suppose the HBO Max news affects any possible first dollar gross deals Warner Brothers might have with the directors of those films, or even in deal making going forward? Will this affect the guilds in any way? Oh, I absolutely think it will. For what Blizzard of Taz is asking is that there are when you make a deal, if you're like an A-list director, you get box office bumps as part of your deal, depending on how you've negotiated it. Meaning that if your movie grosses above a certain amount, you get a bump. You get you get $1 million bump if you make it to this far, a $5 million bump if you get it to this far. All of that deal making, all of that Hollywood deal making is going to have to be changed. And you know what's going to happen? The studios are going to say, well, since we're not releasing movies theatrically anymore, well, the box office bump you'd normally get is going to be taken away. And since the studios aren't necessarily releasing streaming numbers, if you say that, well, okay, you know, it's not going to... The thing about a box office bump, it means more people are going to the movies. When more people go to the movies, the studio makes more money. In the case of streaming services, they might gain more subscribers, but what studios want to do is you're keeping a level of subscribers that you already have as well. So how do you quantify what normally would be a box office bump? I think what's going to happen is it's going to be more expensive to make things because we're going to lose all of those. Blizzard of Taz, a very important question to ask. It's very difficult for me to answer that question, but I would imagine it's going to change things quite a bit in terms of what talent's going to get paid. So, yeah. Nerdy by Nature became a member. Well, thank you, Nerdy by Nature. Robert Silver subscribed. Thank you. And Minty Fresh Collector Dad 20 has subscribed to your channel. Minty Fresh makes me think of Gem Mint. I can't help but think of Gem Mint. Gem Mint. I don't know Gem Mint. I don't know that guy. I don't even know his real name, and I feel bad because I watch his channel all the time. I don't know if you ever watch Gem Mint Collectibles, man, but I like to watch his statue unveilings and figure out what omnibuses to buy. Because, yeah. Kinky Sphincter. I've always thought of my sphincter as kinky. Shaun of the Dead 4K from Everything Blue Order is up. You and Dieter better talk about this sweetness. Ooh, I didn't know that. Everything Blue. Is Zavvi going to have that out too? I got to get that. I would love to get Shaun of the Dead in 4K. Optimistic Viewer sends in a tip and says, Perry Mason always won his cases. Sam Beckett always fixed what once went wrong and was able to leap. Kirk always won the fight. Why? Because it was their shows. Star Trek Discovery is Burnham's show. Of course she always wins. It's her show. Yeah, but is that what Star Trek is? And did Kirk and company always win? I mean, what is a win? I mean, they might have solved a problem, but it's not called Star Trek Burnham. But, you know, you may be right. Devin Hilton asks about the short story competition. I'm going to give the submission guidelines shortly. I'm sorry, I've just been so swamped that I haven't written them down yet. I haven't given them to Mike. But basically, in a nutshell, for those of you who don't know, we are having a short story contest. That's going to be our next contest. It begins now. And I'm going to put something up on the website where we are. So the phrase imagination connoisseur is something that I came up with. People have asked me, what is that? And in my mind, an imagination connoisseur is a person, basically a person who enjoys well, all of the things that we love, everything that's part of the Post-Geek singularity, music, movies, anything that requires, if you are a discerning person that enjoys flights of fancy in any way, shape, or form, you're an imagination connoisseur. So the name of the anthology that we're publishing is The Imagination Connoisseurs, and we are looking for stories between 5,000 and 10,000 words that delve into the meaning. The Imagination Connoisseurs. What does it mean to be an imagination connoisseur? What do imagination connoisseurs like? Straight up horror, science fiction, fantasy stories, so that could be that. But the whole overarching idea of the anthology is define what it means to be an imagination connoisseur, either through a story that appeals to imagination connoisseurs, or maybe a story that delves into how do you become an imagination connoisseur. I don't know. I don't want to limit what anybody says. And so we're going to have an entry fee probably the same as the film festival. I wanted to make it lesser, but I think this one I'm not going to get away with. I'm going to have to pay people something because I need people to read. So it's going to be like a $25 submission fee. Then what we are going to do, hoping the stories are good, as many stories that are good as we can, we're going to put them, we're going to make a book. And the winners will get a copy, probably a few copies of the book, and then we'll also make the book for sale. And then on March 1st, one of those stories I am going to turn into a short film and direct. How fun is that? And then maybe if that goes well, we'll turn all the stories, we'll make it an anthology series or something. So there you go. We'll see. We'll see. So that's all I can tell you, but I'm going to get those guidelines up. Evan Newman is here and sends in a tip and says, thank you for recommending undervalued movies so often. I saw Thief for the first time recently on your referral. What a movie. And Score. It's obvious upon seeing it how influential it was for Drive. I'm sure it would have made your list of T movies. Oh, it would have. What Evan Newman is referring to, one of my favorite films, is Michael Mann's first theatrical feature, Thief, starring James Caan, with a score by Tangerine Dream that apparently won a Razzie. Oh my God. I mean, all you have to do is watch the beginning of Thief and listen. It's like a 9-minute sequence where they crack a very formidable safe to Tangerine Dream's music, and the piece of music is called Diamond Diary. I think I read that script. I think I listened to that soundtrack 100 million times, and I still do. Sean Pullen says, are you assuming offense on behalf of the LGBTQ community? I'm not. Have you asked any about Discovery? Is it your place to decide how they should feel? Maybe invite transgendered Trekkie YouTuber Jesse Gender on your show. I wouldn't mind doing that. But yes, I will say this. When I wrote let me find it. Since you asked this specific question, I will refer to my specific tweet and a specific response that I received. So, this morning, I tweeted this morning after watching the Voyager Discovery episode last night. I tweeted, why has Discovery completely segregated their LGBTQ characters amongst each other? Having Adira, a Trill, explain their desire to use specific pronouns to Stamets seems an odd choice. Wouldn't being a host for a Trill offer a non-binary person a new, unique perspective on gender? I tweeted that. And let's see. I want to read this response that I received. The very first person who wrote me back was a friend of mine, Brett Hartinger. And Brett Hartinger is a gay man who I work with briefly on the movie Geography Club, which was an adaptation of his young adult novel. He's a great guy. Him and his partner have been traveling the world. I guess, I don't know if it's his husband maybe, who I met. Delightful couple, the two of them. And I like Brent's writing, and I like him very much. And he wrote back, that is a really excellent point. So I would say that, yes, the answer to your question, Sean, is, I mean, not everybody, but somebody that I actually know and have worked with who is gay wrote back and said that was an excellent point, and I know he's a fan. If you've read his books, actually they're quite good. I enjoy them. And I don't. First of all, I'm not deciding how anyone feels. I'm not speaking for anybody. My opinion is my own, and I was trying to make a point. I'm asking the question: why has Discovery completely segregated their LGBTQ characters amongst each other? I don't think that's not my opinion. I was just watching the fact that Adira and Stamets' relationship seems to be something that seems a little insular. And I asked the question, again, having Adira, a Trill, explain their desire to use specific pronouns to Stamets seems an odd choice. And the reason I say that is because wouldn't Stamets know? And then I asked the question, wouldn't being a host for a Trill offer a non-binary person a new, unique perspective on gender? I mean, from a science fiction context. So I don't believe that I wasn't assuming offense at all. I was asking a question. I'm coming more from the perspective of this writing does not make sense 1,000 years from now. It might make sense today, but on a science fiction show, one of my great problems with Discovery is the writers are not extrapolating what. One of the great things about science fiction is you get to have people extrapolate upon what it would be like. What if this happened? If we were 1,000 years in the future, what would that future be look like based on where humanity is right now? Hell, a science fiction novel I'm obsessed with, Blind Sight, makes the point that by the 2080s, one of our main characters in that book meets a woman, and the woman's surprised he has sex with real people. That sex robots and all that have replaced any kind of sex anybody has with real individuals. If you guys want to read a great science fiction novel, read Peter Watts' Blind Sight. It was nominated for a Hugo in 2006. I loved it. Benson sent in a super chat. Thank you so much. Rob, loving the show as ever. As you know, I love your work on the Superman Returns. It was said that the second movie would have been a Wrath of Khan story. Did Brian ever divulge what the story would have been? There is a script for Man of Steel 2, or I guess it's called Man of Steel, for Superman Returns. And then I had pitched Brian a story, but it was all being worked on, and it was never really clear, unfortunately, which is a bummer. Cliff Elor is here and says, "Hey brother, hope all. What are your thoughts on audio fiction as another way to bring a story to life instead of a film or graphic novel? Is it a viable medium?" Cliff, I love audio fiction. Run, don't walk if you're a fan, even if you're not. Neil Gaiman's The Sandman is my favorite comic book series of all time. The audio drama that he narrates, oh my God. I love audio dramas. I grew up, when I was a kid, one of my favorite things in the world was the CBS Radio Mystery Theater presents, and then they had this great creaking, and this door would open and it would have this music, and the little like timpani drum, and then you'd hear this, and then I'm your host, E.G. Marshall, and they would use all of the library music from the Twilight Zone, like everything that Goldsmith and Bernard Herrmann did. They would use that, and they were hour-long audio dramas. Man, I lived for that shit when I was a kid. 10:07 every night on Cairo in Seattle. I think you can go get them, but I think audio dramas are dope. I love them so much. So yes, Cliff. Yes. And by the way, I totally recommend going off and listening to audio dramas, old-time audio dramas. I love audio dramas. I love old-time audio dramas. They're great. Electron Star Collapse sends in a $5 super chat and says, "Seriously, Rob, thank you for speaking on my transgendered behalf against Star Trek Discovery. My voice would otherwise be ignored." Well, there you go. I mean, to me, here's what I don't understand: electron star collapse, and I really don't understand this much at all. And as I said, 1,000 years in the future, I would think that all of these questions, as whether if somebody was transgendered or non-binary or all of these questions would have been long since solved, and they wouldn't be problems anymore. Like, for instance, I've talked about this before. Like, I believe that somebody who's trans was born that way. And I think probably eventually we will have science to that effect. Like whether or not you were in the womb and you were exposed to more estrogen or testosterone or something, and you literally developed in the womb as a result of natural forces. And what would happen is people that might have mentally identified, they were supposed to be mentally a woman and they're born in the body of a man, and there was a disparity between the two, will one day be able to be scientifically proven. So people don't have to think they're going crazy, and it'll be a natural phenomenon. People will be able, not even a phenomenon, people just recognize it. And then you will, at a certain point, whenever you want it, will be able to get gender reassignment surgery, and it ain't no big thing, and nobody would care. And there wouldn't be this idea, well, necessarily, people would realize this is just a natural part of, it's rare, but it would be a natural part of being a human being. And eventually in the future, you would have that taken care of. And, and you'd be able to live your life exactly the way you want to live your life. And, the medical technology would probably make a transition fairly easy. So I would imagine that would be the case 1,000 years from now. So when I hear a character talking about, especially a character that's now a Trill, who's now got the memories and the life essence of all the past lives that they've lived. And when they're still identifying as non-binary, I would be like, living as a Trill, living as both if you now have the life essence of both men and women in your past, what would that, if you're a non-binary person that didn't have that perspective before, you consider yourself non-binary, when you have the lives of many different lives of people that have lived as women or men, you would have more insight into gender than ever. I would think that your idea that maybe you'd still be non-binary, but maybe you'd be something that's even greater than that. Like maybe something new. Like all of that would give you a perspective that you didn't have. That would be the sci-fi way to go. In this day and age, I think what my problem with it all, it's like Adira, after becoming the host to a Trill, is still identifying as non-binary, like something of today. Well, what would happen if that person existed 1,000 years from now? What would they be like then? And when they use that term today, in 50 years, is people still going to be using that term? I don't know. It just seemed like they were not thinking it through. And some of the great, if you think about it, one of the cornerstone science fiction novels about gender, Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. If you're going to start dealing with gender, and the way Star Trek, by the way, has dealt with gender in the past, I'm thinking about an Enterprise episode, Cogenitor. And there was a species that needed 3 genders to reproduce. And that third gender was a second-class citizen. It was an enlightened, very intelligent civilization, but yet they treated their third gender horribly. Now, to me, that's the kind of science fiction story that you need to illuminate the problems here on Earth. When you start identifying people, it's just like, in Star Trek in the original series, as heavy-handed as Let That Be Your Last Battlefield was, when you have people that are white on one side and black on the other, and black on one side and white on the other, and they're racially prejudiced against one another to the point where they're going to burn their planet to the ground, which they did, even the staunch racists among us, watch an episode of Star Trek and go, well, that's pretty silly. That's pretty dumb. That was the whole point. That's how you deal with racism. And that's why you have a science fiction show. But when you're dealing with ideas of gender and you just make it like, well, you're going to use my personal pronouns. you're not availing yourself of your science fiction context. Show us a cool science fiction contextual story like Cogenitor, where you've got 3 genders, and it's the third gender that is the one that's being discriminated against. I mean, that way people are like, okay, I get it. But then you still get the interesting science fiction angle that makes you think. And the whole conversation that Adira has with Stamets, you're like, you have a non-binary character telling our gay character that they're non-binary. Well, our viewership, like, how's that educating the people at large? What it should have been is, I'm not, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but I'm just saying, how insular is that? Where's the lesson there? I mean, Stamets is like, oh yeah, of course. But what you need to do is, you should really, if you're going to play that game and somebody's going to be misgendered or dead named or something like that, do it with somebody that isn't already, maybe, let's call it, supportive of your cause. How are you teaching anyone a lesson? And how are you helping viewers broaden their perspective and horizons? I mean, it's to me, it's sort of muddled. And also, while they admirably, they have a non-binary actor playing a non-binary character. But shouldn't a non-binary actor be able to play a male or a female character as well? Wouldn't that be more progressive? I don't know. These are not things for me to say. These are things for me to ask questions and wonder about. Jack Wallace became a member. Thanks, Jack. The Richard says, Zoom watch party after the show for True Romance. No need to be on video or audio, just have fun. Well, guess what? We're doing True Romance for Whining About Movies, episode 101. So, anyway. And Sean's back. Sean says, many LGBTQ people in the chat have chimed in that you speak for them. I don't presume to speak for them. I speak for me. And I speak for my opinions. I don't want to ever be seen as somebody that is speaking for someone necessarily. I am an advocate of people. I've always been an advocate of LGBTQ. I've always been an advocate for, I guess, as an advocate, meaning I've never thought of people as any different, that someone's sexuality or who they choose to love. I mean, I understand why we've lived in a civilization like that, but I mean, I've had LGBTQ friends since I was, 13? And I just consider them my friends. I've got some of my actually oldest, dearest, closest friends, and it's funny because I don't think of them as LGBTQ until I'm asked. They're just my friends. So I wouldn't presume to speak for them, but I am curious about when, obviously, people need advocacy. They need people to speak, marginalized voices or people that have been suppressed or oppressed or abused or with violence. I mean, horrible terror. I'll tell you something. During the AIDS epidemic, there was a guy who worked for Paramount named Joe Vigil. And he was up in Seattle, and he knew all the distributors. I mean, I think he was the Paramount rep in Seattle, and I used to go to these exhibitor screenings. And it was, I guess, he said, and I would see him at these screenings all the time, and he announced that he had AIDS. And it was shocking because how quickly the disease ravaged him. And before your eyes, practically, because I would see him every couple weeks, and it was terrifying. And I remember I was thinking, this is an insidiously horrible disease that is literally destroying the creative community, people that I knew. And there was a large, a gay population in Seattle that I had many friends in that population, and it was terrifying. And I couldn't believe that I mean, obviously there's a lot of people, because there was a lot of people in the entertainment industry that got on board and was raising money for AIDS research and things like that. But it was a devastating disease. And to watch somebody I knew, to see it just happen like before my eyes, it was horrific. And I just didn't understand why anybody, like, who cared who they loved or what turned them on or whatever. They were people, and to watch that kind of suffering, I won't ever forget that. But I just think that, everybody needs advocates. And as I've always said, we are one race of people. We are the human race, and we must advocate for everybody everywhere. And I think our differences, and I mean, everybody likes different things. I mean, everybody, to me, people are people. And I think ultimately, until we start to realize that and celebrate our differences and embrace them, because they are all naturally occurring. They are all naturally parts of humanity. Sure, there might be small percentages or less percentages of some people than others, or people with predilections than others, but we're still all part of the same human race. And the sooner we become spacefaring and going out into the universe, the better off we're going to be. But yes. So many LGBTQ people in the chat have claimed that you speak for them. I respect that. I think Jessie would be a good invite, because she has discussed problematic and positive portrayals in Discovery. She might be. I watch her channel, and I do. I don't know. I think I might piss her off, not because I'm a white cis male, but because of my opinions about Discovery. Look, there's a lot of people who like Discovery because of its representation. They're going to like Discovery because you have a non-binary character telling another character, can you please use my proper pronouns? There's going to be people that love that. And I sympathize with that. I'm like, you should love that. Because how many television shows have ever shown you that before? And why shouldn't Star Trek be one of those? And if you like Star Trek, I would never want to say to somebody what if you're a 16-year-old, because Adira's supposed to be 16, right? What if you're 16 and you like science fiction, you're a 16-year-old imagination connoisseur, and you watch this episode today, and Adira comes out and corrects Stamets, and everybody's been calling Adira, a girl, and she finally comes out and says, look, please, I'm tired. I am non-binary, and I would prefer if you called me this. You know how many people, if you're a 16-year-old non-binary person who are going to stand up and cheer for that and love that moment, how meaningful that moment is going to be for them? Do you think they want to hear some middle-aged white dude like myself, cisgendered male, bang on about how I'm sitting there going, oh my God, they're sequestering all the gay LGBTQ characters together. My opinion of that might be true, but for somebody who's 16 or even older and who's loved Star Trek their whole lives, and for having a character like Adira come out and say, would you please just call me by my own pronouns that I prefer, do you know how much that's going to mean to somebody? And I would never want to take that moment away from them. Now, I'm looking at Discovery more holistically, coming from the entirety of the 54-year history of the Star Trek franchise. But I would never, and I think the problem that I have with a lot of people that like Discovery is that when there's moments like that, moments where they have had some kind of an emotional catharsis, and they've felt it's made them feel something. And how often does entertainment really make somebody actually feel something? And by God, watching Discovery, if you're an emotional person, the amount of time people cry, and I mean, the show is like designed to be almost like an encounter group. Now, for me, I'm looking at it much more as a science fiction show about the future. I am not thinking about how it makes me necessarily feel. But I think my point is well taken about Adira, and I think part of the reason that I find myself in conflict with people, especially over Discovery, is that there are things in this show that are really working for people. And if it works for them, I don't want to. I would never want to take that away. But on the other hand, I try and I'm looking at things from the big picture, and that's what I'm saying. To me, it's tough, you know. It's tough because I'm trying to look at it as a science fiction story, and not necessarily, oh, it's given me a moment that I particularly love. In my mind, I think the fact that it becomes too much of today is detrimental to the show. So, yeah. Cedric Taylor 08 sends in a super chat and says, "The badge is like a radio repeater. You have a relay in a key area." That's true. Maybe that might be true. I don't know. We're talking about the transporter technology again. Dakaris Against Humanity subscribe to the channel. Man, I really got to get my Drunk Moonraker commentary up for everybody. Hey, Raygun Media Productions became a member. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Philip Moore became a member. Why, thank you. Oh, okay. Let's see. So, Rob, I have an update for you, says Nick Parrish. Adam Aaron just responded to the news today as reported by Deadline, and good news is A, he was more tempered than he was with Universal, and B, he is engaging in immediate talks with Warner Brothers about 2021. I want to be positive. Adam Aaron, I believe, is the one of the heads of AMC who went off on Universal about what they were doing with theaters. And I think after knowing what he said when Universal did this, I think Warner Brothers should have gone to him first. Why weren't they having this discussion already? I mean, I know there's a lot of money. I know, it's rough. Jordan Harper sends in a super chat and says, "Any chance Netflix will try and sign an exclusive deal with a studio such as Sony, for example? Studio at the streaming site." Big fan. Well, thank you, Jordan. I got to tell you, I thought Netflix with their Eddie Murphy deal was going to, especially after they call me Dolomite, or Dolomite is my name. I thought for sure Paramount would sign an exclusive deal with Netflix. I thought for sure that was going to happen, and it didn't. It didn't. So, but I think maybe, but you know what? With the amount of money that's going to come in with streaming services, they're going to look at Sony will look at its library. Will they come in and start their own streaming service? I think it really depends because it's kind of the future of the industry. So, yeah. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, "Keep up the good work." Well, thank you for that, Anonymous. I try. ALJ1127 has subscribed to the channel. Thank you. I appreciate that. Jonathan Aldridge sends in a super chat and says, I continue to watch the old Star Trek films, including First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis. It's difficult to enjoy because of New Trek. Is it difficult to enjoy because you don't like the old movies, or you New Trek has soured you on Star Trek? It's the storytelling is so different. Just the way the characters talk to each other. I mean, you feel like you're in a quasi-military environment, space navy, and that it's more classical storytelling. I feel like Star Trek Discovery is like like I said, it's like this generic relationship kind of storytelling. But even then, my God, I go back and I am not necessarily Mr. Sports guy, but boy, do I love the Friday Night Lights TV series. And to me, the same way I looked at The West Wing, I'm like, they could make a Star Trek show like The West Wing seemed like Star Trek. Well, so did, as far as a family show goes, Friday Night Lights, man. I love that show. Aside from two shows that were a mistake, 2 episodes. I mean, to me, Coach Taylor and his wife were like, he was captain of the starship. I loved Friday Night Lights. A Classic Comics sends in a super chat and says, the CBS Radio Mystery Theater are available on YouTube. I can't believe it. I got to go listen. That's amazing. I did not know that. Jonathan Aldridge sent in by the way, everybody should go listen to one. maybe, first of all, Google the best CBS radio mystery theater shows first and go listen to one of those because they're great. Jonathan Aldridge sends in another super chat and says, Rob, we already have gender reassignment surgery. It's that it's difficult to do financially. Oh, but that's what I mean. I mean, with the medical technology in the future, they could probably do gender reassignment surgery for you almost instantaneously. So if people wanted to do that, they could. And by the way, speaking of that, 1,000 years from now, if you don't think we're going to be living in a transhuman arena, I mean, if you don't think that human beings, we already have body modification now. I mean, there are going to be people, even like in Neuromancer, if you've read William Gibson's Neuromancer, the people have like some, I remember, was it Molly, the assassin who has like sunglasses put into her face and there's readouts in them. People are not going to, you're going to have human beings walking around that have had all kinds of modifications. We're going to have genetically engineered people. There's going to be so many more interesting things going on, you know, and I'll bet you, like, depending on, can you imagine, what about how human sexuality is going to be affected by hooking up with aliens? You know, I mean, how is that going to affect us? And that's another thing. I think that showing a human civilization 1,000 years from now hopelessly mired in the kind of thinking that goes on here in the 21st century is wrong-headed. I mean, imagine what's going to happen in the future what'll happen to sexuality in the future. You know, right now, all humans know is what's here on Earth. What happens to human sexuality when we spread out amongst the stars? And if you use the Star Trek universe as an example, if you are, and by the way, our sexuality on Earth is defined by what we know of this planet. And for instance, if you look at trans characters or LGBTQ characters or people in general, if they are in fact naturally occurring, as I believe they are, what happens when, say, you are a human being, whether you're straight, whether you're gay, whether you're trans, whether you are non-binary? What happens when anybody with a healthy libido goes out into the universe and finds aliens that are like you find at Delton, you know, with their sexual powers? What are they going to do to you? And if you as a human being, no matter who you are, you know, like I kind of want to be Tom Ford. Like I always think about people I would like to be. And like I'd love to be Tom Ford. I'd like to be a really like, I don't know, a guy that can dress that well. And he's one of my idols. I love Tom Ford. And he's a filmmaker. So let's say you're a hip, beautiful, gay designer on Earth, and then you go into the universe and you find something you've never seen before. I don't know what that is, you know, and suddenly you think as a gay man, or let's just say straight dude or non-binary person, your sexuality has only been defined by what you found on Earth because that's all you know. Well, what happens if you go and you find, I don't know, a whole other, and you find yourself attracted to a beautiful alien species that has a far more developed sense of sexuality and shows you things you've never seen before, or has a part of their sexuality that becomes literally they can mentally touch you as well as physically touch you. Like, I would rather see an exploration of that, you know, and having somebody being persecuted. I don't know what that is. You know, I have no idea, but wouldn't that be cool? Like, I want to see 1,000 years in the future, how has human sexuality evolved? You know, to me, watching a Star Trek show where you're talking about somebody being non-binary seems, well, today, sure, but I would much rather see metaphorically what happens when, like, in Aliens, when they say it doesn't matter whether it's Octurian, baby. Well, what does that mean? What's an Octurian like? You know? I don't know. Like, what if a human being, what if you could have sex with somebody and you could switch bodies? So I could feel like, as a woman, what it's like to be penetrated by a man, or if I wanted to, I could change bodies with somebody who was gay, and I could feel what it's like to make love to a man. I mean, that would be interesting. So we would have a sense of what, I mean, that would be, I'd be down with that. Like, you could literally body swap. Maybe you could go for like what happened. I forget the planet. Why am I the planet that I'm missing from Turnabout Intruder, when Janice Lester has the essence of, like, I would be interested, as somebody who's interested in human sexuality, if I could switch places, if I could have my essence put into a different body, I would be interested in trying those things. I mean, I know that I'm not sexually aroused by a man, but if I could be put into the body of a man where I would be sexually aroused, it would be interesting to experience what it was like to make love to another man. Or the same would be true of being in the body of a woman. What's it like? I don't know. I have no sense of that. But if we had that ability, I'll bet you people would become addicts to that. And what if it was an alien race? What if you found an alien race and you could do the same thing? Who knows? I mean, if you're a fan of sexuality and you are comfortable enough in the future with yourself to realize that you could experience other forms of lovemaking, as Data says, many forms of pleasuring, if we could sort of move away from our like, we're hardwired to be a certain way. But what if in the future we become so advanced as people that you would escape all of that and you could have all kinds of physical pleasuring? Why would you deny yourself the sexual pleasuring of a whole galaxy? I don't know. It just seems a little limiting. I think in the future we'd like to see something more. Sean says, again, Rob, sometimes I read your tweets and get so mad. You seem so gulp, obtuse, and close-minded. Then I tune into your channel and remember how fair and reasonable you are. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Jonathan Aldridge goes on to say, Rob, there is a difference. The reproductive process of human beings is currently not based on a third gender. It's two genders. But I got you, though. No, I know. But I think that metaphorically, the story of Cogenitor was really interesting because they used the science fiction concept of three genders to shed light on a story about discrimination and second-class citizens. And I mean, that's the whole thing. That's what I want from science fiction, what I expect from science fiction, is to be challenged from an ideological and imagination perspective. So the idea is, like, how would human sexuality or gender, how would all of that have moved forward 1,000 years from now? And if we had the kind of medical technology, like what if, they talked about, jokingly, we've discussed whether Klingons have two penises. I mean, what would that be like? What would that be like to have two penises and maybe be able to pleasure two partners at the same time? There would be an interesting sexuality thing. I would be curious about that. And because really, if you think about it, just when you're talking about, we're talking sexuality here. I'm not talking about reproduction. I'm talking about sexuality. There's certainly a wide spectrum of all kinds of sexuality on this planet. And I think if you're going to delve into sexuality, why not metaphorically do it with the universe 1,000 years in the future? Because, man, that could be hot, too. Jonathan Aldridge says, is watching the films of old Trek knowing that the current Trek has changed? Oh, yeah, I know. Well, it's really hard for me. It's really, I think that's what's so maddening. One of the things I liked about Star Trek was how it evolved. I liked there was sort of a lineage there they've completely got rid of. Jonathan Aldridge sends in a super chat again and says, is genetic engineering the wrong idea? Old Trek showed how dangerous it could be. Well, see, that's another thing. They did talk about genetic engineering being wrong because we were terrified of it. But now, we've had movies like Gattaca and CRISPR technology, and when human beings can be designed, what are the moral and ethical implications of that? I mean, how about this? Now, of course, we live in a society where we have many stories about people who are handicapped. Well, what if, what are the moral implications if you find out that you are going to have a handicapped child and you can fix that child in the womb? Or is it meant to be fixed, or was it supposed to be that way? Who knows? But I think in the future with this kind of technology and biotechnology are where it's going to go. And I think that's what it disappoints me that Star Trek, the future of Star Trek Discovery, it's like what Khan said in Space Seed. How little man has changed. Khan was disappointed. And he was right. He's like, it's been 300 years. You're kind of like the same people. So what are you going to do? I wish, like, I'm the product of controlled genetics. You guys should be much better than me now. But we don't have that. But anyway, I thought it was interesting. I'm going to bring an end to this show. This has been going on for quite some time. So I want to thank everybody for being here. What a fun show this has been. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel in many different ways. I want to thank everybody for subscribing and becoming members and all that. I want to remind everyone, Whining About Movies 101 is tonight. We're talking about Tony Scott's 1993 film True Romance. It's kind of a postscript to doing Kill Bill 1 and 2. So, yes, all of that is very exciting. Very, very, very exciting. Yeah. And I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank the Richard. And I want to thank the Richard and everybody who runs the Post-Geek Singularity watch parties. I want to thank Bunyan Snipe for being here. I don't know how many other people were here, but thanks for being here. And I have great bunch of moderators, so thank you all for being here. You're great to have. And Purple Valkyrie was here. Love Purple Valkyrie. Thank you all. Now, I am going to get off this show and stop talking on the internet for at least 2.5 hours. So anyway, again, remember, as I switch back to this is really what a raucous show this has been. I want to thank you all for being here. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to everybody, have a better day. I will be back on the John Campy show tomorrow, and I will be back here tomorrow. And, yeah. So, have a better day.